Every parent knows the heartbreak of watching their children cry for someone who will never come home again. Thomas McKenna had buried his wife 6 months ago, and still his 2 little girls called out for their mama in the dark Colorado nights. The widowed mountain man was drowning in grief and responsibility, trying to raise 7-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Lucy alone in their remote cabin. He couldn't braid hair properly or mend their torn dresses the way Sarah used to. When a fierce autumn storm brought a desperate woman named Catherine to his door, soaked and starving with nowhere to go, Thomas saw a chance to help them both. She needed a home. His daughters needed a mother's care. So he made her an offer that could change everything. But what happens when 2 broken people discover that the greatest love can grow from the simplest acts of kindness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled through the pines like a banshee's wail, rattling the shutters of the McKenna cabin as Thomas sat by the dying embers of the fire. His calloused hands held Sarah's recipe box, weathered pine, with her careful script across dozens of index cards inside. "Molasses cookies for when the girls are blue," read one. "Sunday pot roast with extra carrots for Thomas," said another. Each card was a ghost of the woman who had filled this cabin with warmth and the sweet scent of fresh bread. 6 months. Had it really been that long since the fever took her? Some days it felt like yesterday. Others, like a lifetime had passed since he'd heard her gentle humming while she worked at the kitchen counter. Flour dusting her apron and love lighting her eyes when the girls burst through the door with scraped knees and wild stories from their adventures. Thomas closed the recipe box and set it aside, unable to bear another moment of those careful notations in her flowing hand. The cabin felt hollow without Sarah's presence, like a shell of what it once was. Even with Emma and Lucy asleep in the loft above, their soft breathing barely audible over the storm. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. He pulled Sarah's wedding ring from beneath his flannel shirt, where it hung on a leather cord next to his own wedding band. The simple gold circle caught the firelight, and for a moment he could almost see her face in the dancing flames, laughing at something Emma had said, or singing Lucy to sleep with that old hymn about walking through green pastures. The girls. Lord help him, he was failing them every single day. This morning he'd tried to braid Emma's thick brown hair for school, but his large fingers fumbled with the fine strands until she'd run off in tears, declaring she'd do it herself. Lucy had asked for pancakes like Mama made, but his had come out flat and burnt. Nothing like Sarah's fluffy golden rounds that had made Sunday mornings feel like celebrations. Emma, at 7, had become fierce and protective, trying to mother Lucy and keep their small world intact. She watched Thomas with serious dark eyes, as if she could hold their family together through sheer will. But Lucy, barely 4 when Sarah died, was forgetting. Her requests for Mama's songs and Mama's stories were becoming less frequent, and sometimes Thomas caught her looking confused when Emma mentioned their mother, as if trying to grasp smoke with her tiny fingers. The worst part was bedtime. Without fail, every single night one or both girls would wake crying for their mama. Thomas would climb the ladder to the loft and hold them, his heart breaking anew each time Lucy asked when Mama was coming home, or when Emma sobbed that she couldn't remember Mama's voice anymore. He was a mountain man, raised on hard work and self-reliance. He could trap and hunt, build furniture with his hands, survive harsh winters that would kill softer men. But he couldn't braid hair. He couldn't mend the tiny tears in their dresses with the delicate stitches Sarah had mastered. He couldn't sing the lullabies that had always soothed their fears, or know instinctively when Lucy needed extra cuddles, or when Emma was pushing herself too hard to be grown up. The storm outside intensified, and Thomas rose to check the windows. Through the thick glass, he could see nothing but swirling white. October storms in the Colorado high country could be treacherous, and this one had been building all day. He'd spent the afternoon securing the livestock and bringing in extra firewood, grateful that the cabin sat in a protected valley with thick stands of pine to break the worst of the wind. This was the life he and Sarah had chosen together, remote, self-sufficient, beautiful in its simplicity. They'd built this cabin with their own hands the year after they married, choosing this spot for the natural spring that provided fresh water year-round and the southern exposure that would warm the rooms even in deepest winter. Sarah had planted her garden in the clearing, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the rocky soil with endless patience and love. Now the garden lay fallow, choked with weeds. Thomas had tried to maintain it after Sarah's death, but between caring for the girls and managing the livestock, something had to give. The sight of those empty, overgrown beds was another daily reminder of all he'd lost, all he couldn't replace. A sharp knock at the door startled him from his brooding. Who would be out in weather like this? Thomas grabbed his rifle from above the mantel. Caution was a way of life in these remote mountains, and approached the heavy wooden door. "Who's there?" he called out, having to raise his voice over the howling wind. "Please," came a woman's voice, thin and desperate. "I need shelter. Just for the night." Thomas hesitated. It could be anyone or anything. But the voice sounded genuinely frightened, and no decent person would leave someone out in a storm like this. He lifted the heavy wooden bar and opened the door. The woman who practically fell across his threshold was soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her head and her simple brown dress clinging to her thin frame. She clutched a small bundle to her chest and looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone who couldn't be much past 25. "Ma'am," Thomas said, setting his rifle aside and reaching out to steady her. "Come in quickly before you freeze." She stumbled into the warmth of the cabin, leaving puddles on Sarah's braided rugs. Thomas could see she was shaking from cold and exhaustion, her lips nearly blue and her breath coming in visible puffs. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, guiding her to Sarah's rocking chair. "I'll get you something warm." He poured coffee from the pot he kept on the stove and added a generous splash of whiskey, then wrapped one of Sarah's quilts around the stranger's shoulders. She accepted both gratefully, her trembling hands wrapped around the warm cup. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm Catherine Walsh. I'm sorry to intrude, but I saw the light from your windows." Thomas studied her face in the firelight. Even exhausted and bedraggled, she had a gentle quality about her. Something in her eyes that spoke of kindness, despite whatever hardships had brought her to his door on such a night. "Thomas McKenna," he said simply. "You're welcome here until the storm passes. But I have to ask, what brings a woman alone to these mountains in weather like this?" Catherine's eyes dropped to her hands wrapped around the coffee cup. "I'm traveling," she said quietly. "Looking for work or somewhere to settle. My horse went lame 2 days ago and I've been walking since. When the storm hit, I thought I was going to die out there." Thomas nodded toward the small bundle she'd been clutching. "What's that?" A flush crept up her neck. "Just my belongings." "Everything I own." She loosened her grip to reveal a threadbare shawl wrapped around what appeared to be a few meager possessions. Everything she owned. Thomas had seen enough hardship in his 32 years to recognize desperation when he saw it. This woman wasn't just traveling, she was fleeing something or searching for something she'd lost. The hollow look in her eyes was one he recognized from his own mirror. "When did you last eat?" he asked gently. Catherine's composure cracked just slightly. "Yesterday morning. I had some bread, but it got wet in the storm." Without another word, Thomas moved to the kitchen and began preparing a simple meal. Cold venison, bread Sarah had taught him to make, beans left over from dinner. As he worked, he found himself glancing back at Catherine, who sat perfectly still in the rocking chair as if afraid to move, afraid to take up too much space in his home. There was something about her presence that felt different from other strangers who'd occasionally sought shelter over the years. Maybe it was the way she'd automatically started folding the quilt neatly despite her exhaustion, or how she'd quietly moved her wet boots away from the fire to avoid damaging Sarah's rugs. Small gestures that spoke of breeding and consideration, even in desperate circumstances. "Here," Thomas said, setting a plate on the small table beside her chair. "It's not fancy, but it's warm and filling." Catherine looked up at him with such gratitude that Thomas felt his chest tighten. When had he last seen that expression? Pure thankfulness for the simplest kindness. Not since Sarah's illness, when every small comfort had meant the world. "Mr. McKenna," Catherine said softly, "I can't thank you enough. I know you don't know me, and taking in strangers can be dangerous," Thomas finished. "Yes, it can be. But my wife always said that turning away someone in genuine need was a sin we'd answer for eventually." He paused. "My late wife." Understanding flickered in Catherine's eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss," Thomas nodded, settling into his own chair across from her. 6 months now. It's been difficult. Children?" Catherine asked gently. "2 daughters. 7 and 4. They're asleep upstairs." Thomas gestured toward the loft. "They've had a hard time of it." Catherine ate slowly, as if savoring every bite, and Thomas found himself studying her face in the firelight. There was intelligence there, and strength beneath the weariness. Whatever had brought her to this desperate state hadn't broken her spirit entirely. "What kind of work are you looking for?" he asked. "Anything honest," Catherine replied. "I can cook, clean, tend children, help with livestock. I'm not afraid of hard work, and you're alone. No family?" Catherine's hands stilled on her fork. "No family. Not anymore." The pain in those 4 words told Thomas there was a story there, probably one as heartbreaking as his own. He didn't press, but he found himself wondering what tragedy had brought this gentle-seeming woman to his door, hungry and desperate, carrying everything she owned in a small bundle. Outside, the storm raged on, and Thomas realized that Catherine Walsh would be staying at least through the night, possibly longer if the weather didn't break. As she finished her meal and settled back in the rocking chair, her eyelids growing heavy with exhaustion, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense that his home wasn't quite as empty as it had been that morning. It was a dangerous feeling for a man who'd convinced himself that he and his daughters could manage alone. But as Catherine's breathing deepened into sleep and the storm continued to howl outside, Thomas found himself wondering if perhaps Providence had brought more than just a stranger seeking shelter to his door this night. Thomas woke to the sound of quiet footsteps below and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, he thought Sarah had risen early to start breakfast. Then reality crashed back, and he remembered the storm, the knock at the door, the woman named Catherine who'd sought shelter. He dressed quickly and climbed down from the loft where he'd moved after giving Catherine his bed for the night. She stood at the stove, her dark hair neatly braided despite having no proper mirror, stirring something that smelled like heaven itself. "I hope you don't mind," Catherine said without turning around. "I found some oats and thought I'd make breakfast. It's the least I can do after your kindness. You didn't need to," Thomas began, but she turned to face him with a gentle smile that stopped his words. "It's no trouble. I like to keep my hands busy." She gestured toward the table, where she'd set out plates and cups with more care than Thomas had managed in months. "The storm's passed. You can see the mountains clearly this morning." Thomas looked out the window at the pristine white landscape, snow covering everything in a blanket of peaceful silence. The sight should have lifted his spirits, but instead he felt a strange heaviness. The storm passing meant Catherine would leave, and suddenly his cabin seemed destined to return to its hollow emptiness. "Papa?" Emma's voice drifted down from the loft, followed by the sound of both girls stirring. "Morning, sweetheart," Thomas called up. "Come down for breakfast." The girls appeared at the top of the ladder in their nightgowns. Emma first, with Lucy close behind. Both stopped short when they saw Catherine, their eyes wide with curiosity and confusion. "Girls, this is Miss Catherine Walsh. She took shelter here during the storm last night." Emma's expression immediately grew guarded, while Lucy peered around her sister with open fascination. Catherine smiled warmly at both of them. "Good morning, Emma and Lucy. Your father told me you're 7 and 4. What big girls you are." Lucy smiled back shyly, but Emma's frown deepened. "Where's your husband?" she asked bluntly. Emma, Thomas warned, but Catherine held up a gentle hand. It's all right. That's a fair question. Catherine's smile faltered slightly. I don't have a husband anymore, Emma. He died along with our little boy. From the fever, like your mama. The words hung in the air like a shared weight of sorrow. Thomas felt his chest tighten at the pain in Catherine's voice, while Emma's hostile expression softened into something closer to understanding. How old was your little boy? Lucy asked in her small voice. 3, Catherine whispered. His name was Daniel. He had curly hair like yours, Lucy, and he loved to chase butterflies. Lucy climbed down the ladder and approached Catherine cautiously. I'm sorry your little boy died. Catherine knelt to Lucy's level, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, sweetheart. I'm sorry your mama died too. Emma remained on the ladder, watching this exchange with conflicted emotions playing across her young face. Thomas could see her struggle, the part of her that missed having a woman's gentle presence warring with fierce loyalty to Sarah's memory. As they sat down to breakfast, Catherine's cooking proved to be everything the aroma had promised. The oats were perfectly creamy, flavored with dried berries she'd somehow coaxed to plumpness. And she'd managed to make biscuits that were golden and light. This is delicious, Thomas said, meaning every word. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mother taught me. She said a woman who could feed people well would never want for a place in the world. Catherine's expression grew distant. She was wrong about that, as it turned out. What happened to your family? Emma asked, her natural curiosity overcoming her wariness. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. We had a small farm in Kansas. James, my husband. We'd been married 3 years when the fever came through our county. It took Daniel first, then James a week later. She paused, struggling with the words. I buried them both in the same grave because I couldn't bear to separate them. Thomas felt a familiar ache in his chest, the recognition of grief that matched his own. What did you do then? Tried to keep the farm, but without James, I couldn't manage it alone. The bank took it after 6 months. I've been traveling since then, looking for work, for somewhere to belong again. Catherine looked down at her hands. It's been 2 years now. 2 years. Thomas tried to imagine wandering for 2 years with nothing but what could fit in a small bundle. No home, no family, nowhere to truly rest. The loneliness of it was staggering. Where were you headed when the storm hit? He asked. Nowhere in particular. I'd heard there might be work in some of the mining camps, but... Catherine shrugged helplessly. Those aren't places for women alone. I've been staying in towns when I could find work, moving on when I couldn't. Emma had been listening intently, her young mind clearly working through something. So you don't have anywhere to go? Emma, Thomas said quietly, but Catherine answered honestly. No, I don't, but I've learned to make do. People are kinder than you might expect, especially during storms. After breakfast, as Catherine gathered her few belongings and prepared to leave, Thomas found himself wrestling with an idea that had been growing since he'd watched her gentle interaction with Lucy. It was impractical, possibly dangerous, certainly unconventional. But as he looked at his daughters, Emma trying to braid Lucy's hair with fumbling fingers, Lucy asking when Catherine would come back, he realized that desperation could make a man consider possibilities he'd never imagined. Miss Walsh, he said as she reached for her threadbare shawl. Before you go, could I speak with you privately? Catherine nodded, and Thomas led her outside to the porch where they could talk without the girls overhearing. The morning air was crisp and clean after the storm, and snow sparkled like diamonds in the early sunlight. What I'm about to say might sound improper, Thomas began, his heart pounding. But I want you to hear me out before you answer. Catherine waited, her expression carefully neutral. You need a home and security. My daughters need a woman's care, someone who understands loss, who can give them the gentle guidance I can't provide. Thomas took a deep breath. I'm proposing a practical arrangement. Marriage in name, a partnership for mutual benefit. You'd have a home, protection, a place to belong. The girls would have someone to braid their hair and sing them to sleep and teach them the things their mother would have taught them. Catherine's eyes widened. And Thomas hurried on before she could speak. I'm not talking about this wouldn't be a marriage of passion or romance. It would be an arrangement between two people who've both lost what they loved most and are trying to build something good from what's left. We'd be partners, helping each other and the children. Nothing more would be expected unless someday we both wanted something more. Catherine stared at him in stunned silence, and Thomas felt heat rise in his cheeks. Had he completely misjudged the situation? Was she horrified by his proposition? Mr. McKenna, she said finally, her voice shaky. That's very generous, but you don't know anything about me. For all you know, I could be a good woman who's had more than her share of heartbreak, Thomas interrupted gently. I can see that much. The way you thanked me for simple kindness, how you made breakfast without being asked, how you spoke to Lucy about your son, those aren't things you can fake. Catherine turned away, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. Thomas could see her hands trembling as she clutched her small bundle. I have to tell you something, she said quietly, about my past. It's not, I haven't been entirely truthful. Thomas waited, his stomach tightening with apprehension. James and I, we weren't legally married. We couldn't be, because he was already married to someone else. Catherine's voice grew smaller. I lived as his wife for 3 years, bore his child, but in the eyes of the law and the church, I was just his mistress. The words hung between them like a chasm. Thomas felt the weight of this revelation, understanding now why Catherine had been so desperate, why decent work had been so hard to find. A woman with her reputation would be shunned by most communities. His real wife lived back east, Catherine continued, her voice barely audible. She wouldn't give him a divorce, so we pretended. When the fever took James and Daniel, she came and claimed everything. The farm, the house, even Daniel's toys. I had no legal claim to anything. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. It certainly complicated things. Taking in a woman with such a past would bring judgment from neighbors, possibly harm his daughter's standing in the community. But as he looked at Catherine's bowed head, at the shame radiating from her small frame, he thought about the grace in her movements, the gentle way she'd spoken to his daughters, the gratitude in her eyes for simple human kindness. Miss Walsh, he said finally, look at me. Catherine slowly raised her eyes to his, and he saw fear there, fear of rejection, of being cast out once again. We've all made choices we might make differently if we could go back. What matters to me is the woman I see before me now. Kind, honest enough to tell me a truth that might cost her everything. Good with children who've known too much loss. Thomas paused. My offer stands. If you're willing to help me raise my daughters with love and patience, to be a partner in building a life together, then your past is your own business. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. You would still, even knowing, especially knowing, Thomas said firmly. You could have lied, could have let me believe what I wanted to believe. Instead, you risked everything to tell me the truth. That tells me more about your character than any legal document ever could. Catherine was quiet for so long that Thomas began to think she would refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Mr. McKenna, I accept your offer. Thomas felt a mixture of relief and terror wash over him. They were both taking an enormous leap of faith, two broken people hoping they could somehow help each other heal. We'll need to discuss the practical arrangements, he said. How this will work, what we'll tell the girls, what we'll tell the neighbors. Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. And we should be clear about expectations. I don't want there to be any misunderstandings later, agreed. But first, Thomas extended his hand to her. Partners. Catherine looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then reached into her small bundle and pulled out a torn photograph. In it, Thomas could make out the faded images of a man and a small boy, though the picture was water-damaged and cracked. James and Daniel, she said simply. The only picture I have left. She looked up at Thomas. I want you to know that part of my heart will always belong to them. Thomas nodded solemnly. Just as part of mine will always belong to Sarah. Maybe that's what will make this work. We both understand that love doesn't end with death. And we're not trying to replace what we've lost. Catherine carefully tucked the photograph back into her bundle, then took Thomas's offered hand. Her grip was firm despite the trembling in her fingers. Partners, she agreed. As they shook hands on their unconventional bargain, Thomas felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was real. Perhaps two broken people really could help each other heal. Perhaps his daughters could have the mother's love they so desperately needed. Only time would tell if they were making the right choice. But as Catherine smiled through her tears and the morning sun painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of gold, Thomas allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be all right. The wooden doll lay abandoned on Emma's bed, its painted face staring blankly at the ceiling. Thomas had carved it for her 3rd birthday, spending weeks in his workshop crafting the delicate features and sewing the tiny dress with Sarah's patient guidance. Emma had named her Rosie and carried her everywhere, until the morning Catherine Walsh became Catherine McKenna. I don't need Rosie anymore, Emma had announced with 7-year-old solemnity when Catherine offered to mend the doll's torn dress. I'm too old for dolls. But Thomas had seen his daughter clutching Rosie in the dark hours before dawn, whispering secrets to the wooden face when she thought no one was listening. The doll represented more than childhood comfort. It was a tangible link to the time when Mama was alive and the world made sense. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine's arrival. 3 weeks since their quiet wedding ceremony, with only the circuit preacher as witness. Judge Morrison had performed the legal formalities with barely concealed disapproval, making it clear he thought Thomas was making a grievous mistake. The neighbors' reactions had ranged from polite concern to outright hostility, but Thomas had expected that. What he hadn't anticipated was the complexity of Emma's response to their new family arrangement. Catherine had settled into the cabin's routines with remarkable efficiency. She'd taken over the cooking, cleaning, and mending with skills that far exceeded Thomas's fumbling attempts. The meals were hot and flavorful, the clothes were properly repaired, and Lucy had stopped crying for her mama every night, because now she had Mama Catherine to sing her to sleep. But Emma watched every interaction with suspicious eyes, as if Catherine were an imposter who might disappear if properly challenged. She tested boundaries constantly, leaving her plates unwashed, forgetting to hang up her coat, asking pointed questions about Catherine's past that made everyone uncomfortable. Emma, please set the table for dinner, Catherine said gently, as she had every evening for 3 weeks. I don't have to, Emma replied, not looking up from the book she was pretending to read. You're not my real mother, the words hung in the air like a slap. Thomas saw Catherine's hands still on the pot she was stirring, saw the slight tightening around her eyes that she tried to hide. No, Catherine agreed quietly. I'm not your real mother, and I would never try to take her place. But I am part of this family now, and families help each other. We were a family before you came, Emma shot back. We didn't need you. Emma, that's enough, Thomas said sharply, but Catherine shook her head. It's all right. She has every right to feel upset about changes to her family. Catherine turned to face Emma directly. You're absolutely right. You were a family before I came, and you managed without me. Your papa loves you and Lucy more than anything in the world, and nothing will ever change that. Emma looked up from her book, clearly not expecting this response. But Catherine continued, sometimes families grow. Sometimes new people join who want to help and care for everyone already there. I'm not trying to replace your mama, Emma. I'm just hoping to find a place here where I can belong too. Why here? Emma demanded. Why our family? Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. Because you needed someone and I needed somewhere to belong. Because your papa is a good man who offered kindness to a stranger. And because you and Lucy deserve to have someone who can braid your hair properly and teach you things that men sometimes don't know how to teach. Papa braids my hair fine, Emma lied, unconsciously touching the lopsided plaits Thomas had managed that morning. Of course he does, Catherine agreed solemnly. He does his very best at everything, and that's what makes him such a wonderful papa. Lucy, who had been playing quietly with her corn-husk doll, suddenly piped up. "I like how Mama Catherine braids my hair. It doesn't pull like when Papa does it." Emma shot her sister a betrayed look. "Don't call her Mama Catherine. She's not our mama." "But she takes care of us like a mama," Lucy said, confused by Emma's anger. "She makes good food and reads us stories and sings the sleepy songs." "She's not Mama," Emma repeated fiercely. "Mama had yellow hair and she smelled like lavender, and she used to let me help her in the garden. She's never coming back, but that doesn't mean we need a new Mama." The pain in Emma's voice made Thomas's chest ache. His daughter was caught between her need for motherly care and her fierce loyalty to Sarah's memory. Unable to accept one without feeling like she was betraying the other, Catherine knelt down to Emma's level, her voice gentle but firm. "You're absolutely right, Emma. I'm not your mama, and I never could be. Your mama was special and beautiful, and she loved you more than words can say. Nothing about me being here changes that or makes her any less important." Emma's lower lip trembled. "Then why are you here?" "Because sometimes God puts people in each other's paths when they need each other most. You and Lucy needed someone to help take care of the house and cook meals and do the things that papas sometimes struggle with. And I needed a home and a family to belong to because I was very lonely and scared." "Were you really scared?" Lucy asked, climbing into Catherine's lap with the easy trust of a 4-year-old. "Very scared," Catherine admitted, smoothing Lucy's curls. "I had been alone for so long, and I didn't know where I was going to sleep or how I was going to eat. When your papa offered me a home here, it felt like the answer to every prayer I'd prayed for 2 years." Emma considered this, her young mind working through the complexities of adult emotions. "But why did you have to marry Papa? Why couldn't you just live here and help?" Thomas and Catherine exchanged a quick glance. They had discussed how to explain their arrangement to the girls, deciding on a version of the truth that young minds could understand. "Because that's how families work," Thomas said gently. "When adults decide to take care of each other and live together, they get married. It's a promise to stay together and help each other, especially when things get difficult, like when Mama was sick." Emma asked quietly. "Yes, sweetheart. Marriage is a promise to take care of each other no matter what happens. Catherine and I promised to take care of each other and both of you girls." Emma was quiet for a long moment, absently turning the pages of her book. Then she looked up at Catherine, with eyes far too serious for a 7-year-old. "Do you promise you won't leave if we get sick like Mama did?" Catherine's breath caught, and Thomas saw her eyes fill with tears. She quickly blinked away. "I promise, Emma, I will never leave you and Lucy by choice. The only way I would ever leave is if something happened to me, like what happened to your mama, and that's not something anyone can control. What if I'm mean to you? What if I don't like you? Then I'll still be here," Catherine said simply. "Being part of a family means staying even when people are angry or sad or scared. It means loving each other even when it's hard." Emma studied Catherine's face as if looking for signs of deception. Finding none, she seemed to make some internal decision. "I guess you can stay," she said with the gravity of a queen granting clemency. "But I'm still not calling you Mama Catherine." "That's perfectly fine," Catherine agreed. "You can call me whatever feels right to you. Can I call you Catherine? If that's what you're comfortable with." Emma nodded decisively, then returned to her book. But Thomas noticed she didn't protest when Catherine asked again about setting the table, and she even managed a quiet "thank you" when Catherine complimented her neat arrangement of the silverware. Progress, Thomas thought. Slow, cautious progress, but progress nonetheless. That evening, as Catherine helped the girls get ready for bed, Thomas watched from the kitchen as she patiently worked through the tangles in Lucy's hair and listened to Emma's detailed account of a story she'd read. There was something magical about seeing his daughters receiving the gentle, attentive care they'd been missing, even if Emma was still holding part of herself back. "Papa!" Lucy called from the loft. "Will you come say good-night?" Thomas climbed the ladder to find both girls tucked into their beds, Catherine sitting on the edge of Lucy's mattress with a soft smile. "Sweet dreams, little ones," Catherine said, kissing Lucy's forehead. She paused at Emma's bed, clearly uncertain about boundaries. "Good night, Catherine," Emma said quietly. "Thank you for making the good biscuits for dinner." Catherine's smile widened. "You're very welcome, Emma. Sleep well." As Catherine climbed down the ladder, Thomas tucked the quilts around both girls and kissed them good night. He was almost to the ladder when Emma's voice stopped him. "Papa, do you think Mama would be angry about Catherine being here?" Thomas sat back down on the edge of Emma's bed, choosing his words carefully. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Emma was quiet for a moment. I think maybe Mama would be glad that someone nice is taking care of us. But I still miss her. I miss her too, Emma, every single day. And it's okay to miss her, while also being glad that Catherine is here to help us. Can I love them both? Mama and Catherine. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. Oh, sweetheart, yes. Love isn't something that runs out. You can love your mama forever and still have love for Catherine too. They're different kinds of love, but they can both be real and important. Emma seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly. Okay, Papa, I think I can do that. As Thomas climbed down from the loft, he found Catherine standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames with a thoughtful expression. That went better than I expected, he said quietly. Catherine turned to him with a smile that held both relief and sadness. She's protecting her mother's memory. I understand that completely. It may take time for her to fully accept you. That's all right, Catherine said. Some things are worth waiting for. And Emma needs to know that accepting me doesn't mean forgetting Sarah. I would never want that. Thomas studied Catherine's face in the firelight, struck again by her gentle wisdom and patience. In 3 weeks, she had transformed their daily life from chaos to comfort, all while navigating Emma's resistance with grace and understanding. Thank you, he said simply, for being patient with her, for understanding what she needs. Catherine's smile softened. She's a remarkable little girl, Thomas. Strong and loyal and smart. Sarah raised her well in those first years. The easy way Catherine spoke Sarah's name, with respect rather than jealousy, made something loosen in Thomas's chest. Perhaps this unconventional arrangement really could work. Perhaps they could build something good from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and reminding them all that winter was approaching. But inside the cabin, with the fire burning warm and bright, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the sense that his family was whole again, even if it looked different than before. It would take time for all the pieces to fit together perfectly, especially where Emma was concerned. But for the first time in months, Thomas allowed himself to believe they were on the right path. Thomas's woodworking tools lay spread across his workbench in the barn, each implement carefully maintained and precisely placed. The smell of pine shavings and linseed oil filled the space where he had always found solace in creating useful, beautiful things with his hands. This morning, he was crafting a new shelf for Catherine's few belongings, a small gesture to help her feel more at home in their cabin, the rhythmic sound of his plane smoothing. The wood was interrupted by raised voices from outside. Thomas set down his tool and moved to the barn door, where he could see Emma standing defiantly in the yard while Catherine knelt beside Lucy, who was crying. "I don't have to listen to you," Emma was shouting. "You can't tell me what to do." Thomas stepped outside, his jaw tightening as he took in the scene. Lucy's dress was torn at the knee, and there was dirt on her face that suggested she'd fallen. Catherine was gently examining what appeared to be a scraped palm, while Emma stood with her arms crossed, radiating anger. "What happened here?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying the authority that made both girls straighten up. "Emma told me to climb the big tree," Lucy said through her tears. "She said if I didn't, it meant I was a baby who needed a new mama. But I fell down and hurt my hand." Thomas felt anger surge through him. "Emma, is this true?" Emma's defiant expression flickered with uncertainty. "I didn't mean for her to get hurt. I just wanted to show Catherine that we don't need her taking care of us all the time, by putting your sister in danger." Thomas's voice was sharper than he'd intended, and he saw Emma flinch. "I can take care of Lucy myself," Emma said, but her voice was smaller now. "I did it before Catherine came." Catherine finished cleaning Lucy's scraped palm and stood up, her movements careful and measured. Thomas could see she was struggling to maintain her composure. "Emma," Catherine said quietly, "taking care of someone doesn't mean proving how strong or brave they are. It means keeping them safe and helping them when they're hurt." "I know that," Emma snapped, but tears were gathering in her eyes. "Then why did you ask Lucy to do something that you knew was dangerous for a 4-year-old? Emma's lower lip trembled. Because everyone keeps saying how much better everything is now that you're here. How Lucy doesn't cry anymore, and how the house is cleaner, and how the food tastes good. Like we weren't good enough before." The words came out in a rush, and Thomas felt his heart clench as he finally understood what had been driving Emma's increasingly difficult behavior over the past few weeks. Catherine knelt down to Emma's level, her voice gentle but firm. "Emma, look at me." Reluctantly, Emma raised her eyes to Catherine's face. "Nothing is better because I'm here," Catherine said clearly. "Things are different, but different doesn't mean better. Your papa was doing a wonderful job taking care of you and Lucy. He was just doing it all by himself, which is very hard for anyone." "Then why did he need you?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. Catherine glanced up at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. They had discussed this conversation, knowing it would come eventually, because sometimes people need help, even good, strong people like your papa. "When I was alone and scared, I needed help too. Your papa gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, and I help him with the house and cooking, because that's what families do, they help each other. But what if you decide you don't want to help anymore? What if you leave like—" Emma stopped, unable to voice her deepest fear. "Like your mama left." Catherine finished gently. Emma nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh, sweetheart," Catherine said, pulling Emma into her arms despite the girl's initial resistance. "Your mama didn't choose to leave you. She got sick, and sometimes when people get very sick, their bodies can't fight anymore, no matter how much they want to stay. But you could still choose to leave," Emma whispered against Catherine's shoulder. "I could," Catherine admitted honestly. "People do have choices, but I promised your papa and you girls that I would stay and be part of this family. Do you know what a promise means to me?" Emma shook her head. "It means I give you my word, and my word is the most important thing I have. When I promise something, I keep that promise no matter what, because that's the kind of person I choose to be." Thomas watched this exchange with a mixture of relief and admiration. Catherine was handling Emma's fears with exactly the right balance of honesty and reassurance, acknowledging the girl's legitimate concerns, while providing the security she desperately needed. "Come here, Lucy," Thomas said softly, and his younger daughter ran to him with her bandaged hand. He scooped her up and carried her over to where Catherine and Emma were still embracing. "Emma," Thomas said, settling down on the ground beside them so he could look his older daughter in the eye, "I need you to understand something very important. Catherine didn't come here because we weren't good enough. She came here because we needed help, and she needed a family. Those are two different things." Emma pulled back from Catherine's arms, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "What do you mean?" "I mean that needing help doesn't make you weak or bad. It just makes you human." Thomas reached out and smoothed Emma's tangled hair. "Before Catherine came, I was trying to do everything. Take care of you girls, manage the farm, cook meals, clean house, mend clothes. I was doing my best, but I was exhausted and worried all the time that I wasn't giving you everything you needed." "You were good enough, Papa," Emma said fiercely. "Thank you for saying that, sweetheart. But good enough and having help can both be true at the same time. Catherine helps me so I can spend more time with you girls, instead of worrying about whether the laundry is done or if dinner will be edible." Emma considered this, her young mind working through the complexities of adult life. "And Catherine," Thomas continued, "needed us too. She was alone and scared and had nowhere to call home. We help each other, Emma. That's what makes us stronger together than we were apart. Like when you and Mama helped each other." Emma asked. "Exactly like that," Thomas confirmed. "Mama and I were partners. We each did what we were good at, and we helped each other with the things that were hard. That's what Catherine and I are doing now, being partners to take care of this family. Lucy, who had been listening intently while sucking her thumb, suddenly spoke up. Are you going to have a baby like Mama and Papa did? The question hung in the air, and Thomas felt heat rise in his cheeks. He and Catherine had been very careful to maintain their separate sleeping arrangements and had not discussed the possibility of their arrangement ever becoming a real marriage in all senses. That's not something we've talked about. Lucy, Thomas said carefully, but you could, right? Lucy pressed on with 4-year-old logic. If you wanted to? Catherine's cheeks were pink, but she answered calmly. Someday, maybe. But right now, we're focused on taking care of the family we already have. You and Emma. Emma looked back and forth between the adults, clearly processing this new information. Would you want to have babies with Papa? Emma, Thomas warned, but Catherine held up a gentle hand. That's a fair question too, she said. If your Papa and I decided someday that we wanted to add to our family, it would be because we thought you girls were ready for a little brother or sister, and because we felt like our family was strong enough to welcome someone new. I think I might like a baby brother, Lucy announced. But not yet. I'm still the baby. Despite the emotional intensity of the conversation, Thomas found himself smiling at Lucy's matter-of-fact declaration. You'll always be our baby, Lucy, he assured her. No matter what happens. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then looked directly at Catherine. If you had a baby, would you love it more than me and Lucy? Catherine's eyes filled with tears at the vulnerability in Emma's question. Oh, Emma, no. Love doesn't work that way. If we ever had another baby, it wouldn't take away any of the love I have for you and Lucy. Love grows to fit whoever needs it, like how you still love your little boy Daniel, even though he's not here anymore. Exactly like that, Catherine whispered. My love for Daniel doesn't make me love you and Lucy any less. And if we ever had another baby, my love for you wouldn't make me love that baby any less, either. Emma nodded slowly, as if filing this information away for future consideration. Then she looked at Lucy's bandaged hand, and her expression grew remorseful. I'm sorry I made you climb the tree, Lucy. I didn't want you to get hurt. It's okay, Lucy said generously. But next time, can we just play with dolls instead? Emma managed a small smile. Yeah, we can play with dolls. Catherine stood up and brushed the dirt off her skirt. How about we all go inside and I'll make some tea with honey for Lucy's scraped hand, and maybe some cookies if someone wants to help me bake them. I'll help, Emma said quietly. I'm good at stirring things. I'm sure you are, Catherine agreed. Your papa told me you used to help your mama in the kitchen. Instead of the usual defensive response to mentions of Sarah, Emma just nodded. Mama said I had good hands for baking because I was patient and careful. Those are the best qualities a baker can have, Catherine said warmly. As they walked back toward the cabin, Thomas felt something shift in the dynamics of their unusual family. Emma's outburst had forced them to address the fears and insecurities that had been simmering beneath the surface, and somehow they had all come through it stronger. Later that afternoon, Thomas found himself watching from the kitchen as Catherine and Emma worked side by side at the counter, measuring flour and discussing the proper technique for cutting butter into dough. Lucy sat at the table with her corn husk doll, chattering about how dolls liked cookies too. Emma, Catherine said as they rolled out the dough, would you like to learn how to make the jam tarts your papa mentioned? The ones your mama used to make. Emma looked up with sudden interest. You know how to make Mama's jam tarts? I know how to make jam tarts, Catherine clarified gently. I don't know exactly how your mama made them, but if you remember anything about how she did it, you could teach me. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine enthusiasm Thomas had seen from her since Catherine's arrival. She always made them in little flower shapes, and she let me use the special cutters, and she put raspberry jam in the middle because that was my favorite. Well then, Catherine said, it sounds like you know exactly how to make your mama's jam tarts. Would you like to be the teacher today? Emma nodded eagerly, and Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion as he watched his daughter take charge of explaining Sarah's techniques to Catherine. who listened with respectful attention and asked thoughtful questions. This was what he had hoped. For when he'd made his impulsive offer to Catherine that stormy night, not just someone to manage the household tasks, but someone who could honor Sarah's memory while helping the girls build new traditions. Someone who understood that healing didn't mean forgetting. As the afternoon wore on, and the kitchen filled with the sweet smell of baking cookies and tarts, Thomas returned to his woodworking with a lighter heart. The shelf he was building for Catherine had started as a simple gesture of welcome, but now it felt like something more, a symbol of the permanent place she was carving out in their lives. When the dinner bell rang and he made his way back to the cabin, he found the table set with Catherine's usual care. But tonight there was something extra, a small plate of perfectly formed jam tarts, each one cut in the shape of a flower and filled with ruby-red raspberry preserves. "Emma made these," Catherine announced proudly as Thomas took his seat. She remembered every detail of her mama's recipe. Emma beamed with pride, and Thomas felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. "They look exactly like Mama's," he said truthfully. "I can't wait to taste one." As they shared dinner and the special tarts, Thomas realized that something fundamental had shifted in their family dynamic. Emma was no longer fighting Catherine's presence. She was beginning to work with it, finding ways to honor her mother's memory while accepting the new love and care that Catherine offered. It wasn't the end of their adjustment period, Thomas knew. There would be more difficult days, more moments of doubt and testing. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt like they were truly moving forward instead of just surviving. Later that evening, as Catherine tucked the girls into bed and Thomas cleaned up the kitchen, he reflected on the day's events. Emma's crisis had been painful but necessary, a clearing of the air that had allowed them all to address their fears and hopes honestly. When Catherine came down from the loft, she moved to help him finish the dishes, and they worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Thank you," Thomas said finally, "for the way you handled Emma today, for letting her teach you about Sarah's tarts." Catherine smiled softly. She needed to feel like she could keep her mother's memory alive while still accepting me. "I understand that completely." "You're very wise," Thomas said, meaning it. "Not wise," Catherine replied. "Just experienced in loss. I know how important it is to feel like the people we've loved aren't forgotten." As they finished cleaning and prepared for bed, Thomas felt grateful for the woman who had come into their lives during that autumn storm. Catherine Walsh McKenna was proving to be exactly what his family needed, not a replacement for what they'd lost, but a bridge to what they could become together. The rust-covered garden tools lay scattered in the corner of the barn like forgotten relics of a happier time. Thomas paused in his morning chores, staring at Sarah's hoe and rake, the small hand spade she'd used for transplanting seedlings, the wooden stakes that had once supported flourishing tomato plants. He hadn't touched them since her death, couldn't bear to see the garden beds she'd tended with such love lying empty and overgrown. But this morning, Catherine had asked about them. "Thomas," she'd said over breakfast, "I noticed there's a cleared area behind the cabin that looks like it might have been a garden. Would you mind if I took a look at it?" Emma had looked up from her oatmeal with sudden interest. "That was Mama's garden. She grew the best vegetables in the whole valley." "I'd love to see it," Catherine had replied gently. "Would you show me after breakfast?" Now, as Thomas gathered the rusted tools and carried them outside, he felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always came with reminders of Sarah's absence. The garden had been her pride and joy, her sanctuary where she'd spent countless hours nurturing life from the soil. He found Catherine and both girls standing at the edge of what had once been neat, productive rows. Weeds had taken over completely, and the wooden trellises had collapsed under the weight of wild vines. It was a heartbreaking sight, nature reclaiming what loving hands had once carefully cultivated. "It was beautiful," Emma was saying, her voice wistful. "Mama had flowers along the edges, and she grew the biggest pumpkins for harvest time. And over there," she pointed to a corner thick with brambles. "That's where the strawberry patch was." Catherine nodded thoughtfully, her experienced eye seeing past the current chaos to the garden's original design. Your mama had excellent taste. This is positioned perfectly for morning sun and afternoon shade, and the soil looks rich. She used to sing while she worked, Lucy added, tugging on Catherine's skirt. Pretty songs about growing things. Thomas set the tools down carefully, noting how Catherine's eyes lingered on each implement as if she could read the history in their worn handles. These look well made, she observed, running her fingers along the smooth wooden handle of the hoe. Someone took good care of them. Sarah always cleaned them after every use, Thomas said quietly. Said a gardener's tools were like a carpenter's. They'd serve you well if you served them well. Catherine smiled at that. She was right. Good tools are like old friends. They get better with time and care. Emma was studying Catherine's face intently. Do you know about gardens? Some, Catherine admitted. My mother taught me when I was about your age. And when James and I had our farm in Kansas, I kept a large vegetable garden. It was one of the things I missed most when I had to leave. Could you make this garden grow again? Lucy asked with the straightforward hope of a 4-year-old. Catherine looked around at the overgrown beds, then at Thomas. That would be a big job. It would take a lot of work to clear all these weeds and prepare the soil for planting. And it would be up to your papa whether he wants the garden restored. Thomas felt all 3 sets of eyes turned to him expectantly. The logical part of his mind catalogued the practical benefits: fresh vegetables, herbs for cooking and medicine, the girls learning valuable skills. But the emotional part of him recoiled from the idea of someone else's hands working in Sarah's sacred space. I don't know, he said honestly. It was very important to your mama. I'm not sure, Papa, Emma interrupted, her voice unusually serious. Do you think Mama would want her garden to stay all weedy and dead? Or would she want it to grow good things again? The question hit Thomas like a physical blow. He could almost hear Sarah's voice, gentle but firm. Thomas McKenna, don't you dare let my garden become a monument to sadness. Gardens are for living things, for hope and growth and feeding the people you love. She'd want it to grow again, he admitted quietly. Catherine stepped closer to him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. If it's too painful, Thomas, we don't have to. I understand completely. Thomas looked at her upturned face, seeing genuine concern there, along with carefully restrained enthusiasm. He thought about how much pleasure Sarah had taken in her garden, how she'd loved sharing its bounty with neighbors and teaching the girls about the miracle of seeds becoming food. No, he said finally, his voice growing stronger. Emma's right. Sarah would want the garden to be alive again. But he paused, needing to set boundaries. I think it should be different. Not trying to recreate exactly what she had, but something new that honors what she built. Catherine's eyes brightened. That makes perfect sense. We could keep the basic layout, but plant different varieties, maybe add some things that weren't there before. Could we keep the strawberry patch? Emma asked hopefully. If there are any plants still alive under all those weeds, absolutely, Catherine assured her. Over the next few days, the garden restoration became a family project. Thomas spent his mornings clearing the larger debris and repairing the worst of the weed damage, while Catherine worked with the girls to pull smaller weeds and identify which of Sarah's perennial herbs might be salvageable. The work was harder than any of them had anticipated. Years of neglect had allowed the weeds to establish deep root systems, and some areas required breaking up soil that had become packed and lifeless. But there was something therapeutic about the physical labor, about working together toward a common goal. Look, Lucy called out one afternoon, holding up a small green shoot. I found something growing. Catherine examined the plant carefully. That's chives. They're very hardy. Your mama's chives survived all this time, waiting for someone to find them again. Emma wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. It's like Mama left us presents hidden in the garden. They found other survivors too, stubborn mint that had spread beyond its original bounds, oregano that had managed to compete with the weeds, and in the strawberry corner, a few hardy plants that still showed signs of life beneath their covering of wild growth. These strawberries have strong roots, Catherine observed, as they carefully cleared around the surviving plants. With some care and feeding, they should produce fruit again next spring. The work brought unexpected conversations. As they labored side by side, Catherine shared stories of her mother's garden in Ohio, of the techniques she'd learned for companion planting and natural pest control. Emma and Lucy told stories Sarah had shared about each section of the garden, keeping her memory alive through the practical work of restoration. Thomas found himself watching Catherine more closely during these garden sessions. There was a quality to her movements among the plants that reminded him of Sarah, not in technique, but in the gentle reverence she showed for growing things. She handled seedlings like precious gifts and spoke to the plants as if they could understand her encouragement. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a particularly productive day of soil preparation, Catherine pulled out a small notebook and began sketching. "What are you drawing?" Emma asked, peering over Catherine's shoulder. "A plan for the garden. I want to make sure we use the space well and plant things that will grow happily together." Thomas leaned forward to look at the neat diagram Catherine was creating. She'd incorporated all the elements they'd discussed: vegetables for the table, herbs for cooking and medicine, flowers for beauty and to attract beneficial insects. But she'd also added something new: a small memorial corner where Sarah's favorite roses could be replanted. "You don't have to do that," Thomas said quietly, touched by the gesture. "I want to," Catherine replied. "Sarah put her heart into this garden. It should reflect that." Emma studied the drawing with intense concentration. "Could we put a little sign there, with Mama's name?" "If your papa thinks that would be appropriate, yes." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I think that would be very appropriate. Mama would like knowing her roses were still blooming." As autumn deepened and the initial clearing work neared completion, Thomas began to notice changes in his family's dynamics. The shared project had given them all a common purpose, and working together had created new bonds between Catherine and the girls. Emma, in particular, seemed to have found peace with Catherine's presence. She still spoke of Sarah frequently, but now it was with joy rather than defensive sadness. And she'd begun asking Catherine to teach her new skills: how to save seeds for next year's planting, how to identify beneficial insects, how to make the herbal teas that could soothe winter colds. "Catherine," Emma said one afternoon as they sorted through packets of seeds Thomas had purchased in town, "do you think Mama would like what we're doing with her garden?" Catherine paused in her work, considering the question seriously. "I think your Mama would be very proud. You and Lucy are learning about growing things. Your papa is taking care of the land, and the garden is going to feed your family again. What more could any gardener want? And you're here to teach us things Mama would have taught us if she hadn't gotten sick." "Some things," Catherine agreed carefully. "But I'm not trying to replace your Mama's teaching, Emma. I'm just sharing what I know while helping you remember what she taught you." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "It's like having two Mamas, but in different times. Mama Sarah for before, and Mama Catherine for now." The casual use of Mama Catherine made Thomas's heart skip a beat. It was the first time Emma had used the title without prompting from Lucy, and it seemed to surprise Catherine as much as it did him. "Is that all right?" Emma asked, suddenly uncertain. "Calling you Mama Catherine?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "It's more than all right, sweetheart. It's the greatest honor you could give me." As they prepared for the coming winter, with the garden cleaned and ready for spring planting, Thomas reflected on the unexpected healing that had come from reclaiming Sarah's neglected sanctuary. The work had brought his family together in ways he hadn't anticipated, and seeing Catherine's gentle stewardship of Sarah's legacy had eased his last reservations about their unconventional arrangement. The garden would bloom again come spring, different from Sarah's original design, but rooted in the same love and care, like their family itself, built on the foundation Sarah had created, but growing into something new and beautiful in its own right. Lucy's small fingers worked carefully with the colored pencils, her tongue poking out in concentration as she drew stick figures around a simple house. The paper was covered with cheerful crooked flowers and a bright yellow sun. But it was the family grouping that made Thomas's breath catch in his throat. There were 4 figures holding hands in front of the cabin, a tall man with brown hair, 2 little girls with different colored dresses, and a woman with dark hair, wearing what appeared to be Catherine's favorite blue dress. Above them, Lucy had drawn another figure with wings and yellow hair, smiling down from a cloud. "Tell me about your picture, Lucy," Catherine said gently, settling beside the 4-year-old at the kitchen table. "That's our family," Lucy announced proudly. "Papa and me and Emma and you, Mama Catherine. And that's Mama Sarah watching us from heaven, making sure we're happy." Emma, who had been reading nearby, looked up with interest rather than the pain such drawings might have caused just weeks earlier. "That's really good, Lucy. You drew Mama Sarah's hair just right. It was yellow like sunshine." Thomas watched this exchange from across the room, marveling at how naturally his daughters had learned to include both women in their understanding of family. The drawing captured something profound about their new reality, honoring the past while embracing the present. Winter was settling over the mountains in earnest now. The first heavy snow had fallen 3 days ago, blanketing the valley in pristine white and marking the beginning of the season when families drew close together against the cold. Thomas had spent the morning splitting wood and checking on the livestock, ensuring they were prepared for whatever weather the mountains might send their way. These were the months that tested a family's bonds, long days confined indoors, the constant work of keeping warm and fed, the challenge of finding entertainment and purpose when the outside world disappeared under snow. In years past, the winter following Sarah's death, these months had been nearly unbearable. The cabin had felt like a tomb, filled with grief and silence, broken only by the girls' restless unhappiness. This year felt completely different. Catherine had thrown herself into winter preparations with characteristic thoroughness. The root cellar was stocked with preserved vegetables from their neighbors' gardens, supplemented by wild berries and herbs she and the girls had gathered during the autumn months. She'd spent weeks teaching Emma and Lucy to knit, filling the evenings with the gentle clicking of needles and the satisfaction of creating warm mittens and scarves. "Look, Papa!" Lucy called out, abandoning her drawing to hold up a wonky but recognizable attempt at a mitten. "I made this for you." Thomas accepted the gift with appropriate ceremony, slipping the child-sized mitten over 2 of his fingers. "It fits perfectly." "Thank you, sweetheart." Lucy giggled at the sight of her father's massive hand, attempting to wear her tiny creation. "It's too small. I need to make you a bigger one." "I think that would be a wonderful project for next week," Catherine agreed, examining Lucy's stitches with genuine admiration. "You're getting much better at keeping the tension even." Emma looked up from her own knitting, a scarf that was already nearly 2 feet long and remarkably even for a 7-year-old's work. "Catherine, will you tell us again about the winter you and your mama got snowed in for a whole month?" Catherine settled into her rocking chair, her own knitting in her lap, a sweater she was making for Thomas, though she'd been secretive about the project and only worked on it after the girls were in bed. "Well," Catherine began, her voice taking on the storytelling cadence the girls had come to love, "I was about Emma's age, and we lived in a little house at the bottom of a valley in Ohio. The snow started falling on Christmas Eve and just didn't stop." Thomas found himself listening as intently as his daughters. Catherine had a gift for bringing her stories to life, painting pictures with words that made distant places and times feel immediate and real. But more than that, her stories always carried gentle lessons about resilience, creativity, and the importance of family sticking together through difficult times. By the 3rd day, the snow was up to the windows, Catherine continued, her needles clicking rhythmically as she spoke. "Mama and I couldn't get to town, couldn't even get to the barn without digging tunnels. But you know what? That month became one of my favorite memories." "Why?" Lucy asked, curled up on the floor with her corn-husk doll. "Because my mama and I had uninterrupted time together. She taught me to bake bread that was so good it made the whole house smell like heaven. She showed me how to play card games and how to embroider flowers on pillowcases. We read books out loud to each other and made up stories about the people we imagined lived in other countries. Emma's needles had stopped moving as she became absorbed in the story. "Weren't you scared, being trapped like that?" "Sometimes," Catherine admitted honestly. "But Mama always said that being scared was just your mind trying to protect you from danger that might not even be real. The snow couldn't actually hurt us as long as we had food and fuel for the fire. And we had each other." Thomas found himself thinking about the difference between surviving winter and truly living through it. Last year, he and the girls had simply endured the cold months, counting days until spring returned. This year, with Catherine's presence transforming their daily routines, winter felt like an opportunity rather than a trial. "Catherine," Emma said thoughtfully, "do you miss your mama very much?" Catherine's hands stilled on her knitting for a moment. "Every day, sweetheart. But I've learned that missing someone doesn't have to be only sad. It can also be grateful. Grateful for the time you had together and the things they taught you. Is that how Papa feels about Mama Sarah?" Thomas met Catherine's eyes across the room, appreciating how naturally she included him in these conversations without putting him on the spot. "Why don't you ask him?" Catherine suggested gently. Emma turned to Thomas with serious dark eyes, so much like Sarah's that it still sometimes took his breath away. "Papa, do you think about Mama Sarah every day?" "Yes," Thomas said simply. "Every day. Sometimes it makes me sad because I miss her so much. But more often now, it makes me grateful because I remember how lucky I was to have her as my wife and you girls as my daughters. And now you have Catherine too," Lucy observed with 4-year-old logic. "Yes," Thomas agreed, warmth spreading through his chest. "Now I have Catherine too." The casual acknowledgement of Catherine's permanent place in their family felt like another small miracle. Just a few months ago, Thomas had been drowning in loneliness and responsibility. Now his home was filled with gentle conversation, productive activity, and the comfortable rhythms of a family that was learning to thrive together. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine began preparing dinner while the girls continued their knitting projects. Thomas found himself drawn to help with the cooking, something that had never occurred to him during his bachelor months, but now seemed natural. "Hand me that salt," Catherine said without looking up from the stew she was stirring. Thomas complied, noting how seamlessly they'd learned to work together in the kitchen. Their movements had a practiced quality now, an efficiency born of shared purpose and growing comfort with each other's habits. "The Hendersons stopped by while you were in the barn," Catherine mentioned casually. "Mary wanted to invite us to their Christmas celebration next week." Thomas paused in his slicing of bread. The Hendersons were their nearest neighbors, good people who had been kind to his family after Sarah's death. But social gatherings had been difficult for Thomas since then. Too many pitying looks and awkward conversations about his loss. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd discuss it with you. I thought the girls might enjoy seeing other children, but I understand if you'd prefer a quiet Christmas at home." Thomas considered this. Emma and Lucy had missed out on many social opportunities over the past year because of his own reluctance to face the community's sympathy. But they were at ages where friendships mattered, where being included in celebrations could create happy memories. "We should go," he decided. "The girls would enjoy it, and the Hendersons have always been good to us." Catherine smiled, but Thomas caught a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. "What is it?" he asked gently. Some of the neighbors still aren't sure what to make of our arrangement. Mary Henderson has been nothing but kind, but others," Catherine shrugged. "I don't want to cause problems for you and the girls." Thomas felt a surge of protective anger. He'd been aware of the whispered conversations in town, the speculative looks when he and Catherine appeared together at church or the general store. Their unconventional marriage had raised eyebrows and prompted gossip, especially among those who felt he'd moved on too quickly from Sarah's death. "Catherine," he said firmly, "you are my wife and the girl's mother. Anyone who can't accept that isn't worth worrying about." The words surprised him with their vehemence and their truth. Somewhere over the past months, Catherine had stopped being a practical arrangement and had become essential to his family's happiness. The idea of anyone making her feel unwelcome or unwanted stirred something fierce and protective in his chest. "Thank you," Catherine said softly, and Thomas realized she'd needed to hear that reassurance more than he'd understood. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Thomas and Catherine sat by the fire, working on their respective projects. He was carving a set of wooden animals for Lucy's Christmas gift. While she worked on the mysterious sweater, "Thomas," Catherine said after a comfortable silence, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy? With how things have worked out, I mean." "With our arrangement." Thomas looked up from his carving, struck by the vulnerability in her voice. "Are you?" "I asked first," Catherine said with a small smile. Thomas set down his knife and really considered the question. Was he happy? It felt almost like a betrayal of Sarah's memory to admit it, but "Yes," he said finally. "I am happy. Not the same kind of happy I was with Sarah, but a different kind. A grateful kind of happy," Catherine nodded slowly. "I understand that. I feel the same way. Are you happy, Catherine?" "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," she admitted. "When I knocked on your door that night, I was so desperate and scared. I thought I was asking for charity. I never imagined I was asking for a home." The simple honesty of her words made Thomas's chest tight with emotion. "You weren't asking for charity. You were answering a prayer I didn't even know I was praying." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling softly and snow beginning to fall again outside the windows. Thomas felt the deep contentment that came from being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the people who mattered most. "Catherine," he said eventually, "when we go to the Hendersons' Christmas celebration, I want everyone to see what I see, a woman who saved my family and made our house a home again. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." Catherine's smile was radiant. "In that case, I'd be honored to accompany my husband and our daughters to the party." Our daughters. The phrase sent warmth spreading through Thomas's chest. Somewhere along the way, without fanfare or formal declaration, they had become a real family, not just an arrangement of convenience, but a group of people bound together by choice, care, and growing love. The yellowed marriage certificate lay hidden beneath Catherine's few undergarments in the small drawer Thomas had built for her belongings. She hadn't looked at it in months, had tried to forget its existence entirely, but the sound of horses approaching the cabin sent her hands trembling as she reached for the damning document. The certificate bore two names in faded ink, Catherine Walsh and James Morrison. But James Morrison had never existed, not in the way she'd told Thomas, not in the way that mattered for legal documents. The man she'd loved, the father of her lost child, had been James Whitmore, and he'd already been married when he'd taken Catherine as his common-law wife. Through the cabin window, Catherine could see a well-dressed man dismounting from his horse, his companion remaining mounted as if ready for a quick departure. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the visitor's bearing, the authoritative way he surveyed the property before approaching the door. Thomas was in the barn with the girls, showing them how to properly groom the horses. Catherine had perhaps 5 minutes before curiosity would bring them to investigate the unexpected visitors. The knock on the door came sharp and demanding. Catherine smoothed her skirt with shaking hands and opened it to find a man of perhaps 50 years, his grey beard neatly trimmed and his clothes marking him as someone of means and education. "Mrs. McKenna, I presume," he said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Yes," Catherine managed, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I am Judge Harrison from Denver. I believe we need to discuss your past relationship with one James Whitmore." Catherine's worst fears crystallized into reality. Somehow, after 2 years of careful anonymity, her past had found her. "I don't know what you mean. Come now, Mrs. McKenna, or should I say, Miss Walsh. We both know that's not true." Judge Harrison's eyes were cold, but not unkind. "May I come in? This conversation would be better conducted privately." Catherine stepped aside reluctantly, her mind racing through possibilities and explanations, finding none that would preserve the life she'd built here. As Judge Harrison entered the warm cabin with its smell of fresh bread and evidence of family life everywhere, Catherine felt like she was watching her happiness crumble in real time. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to Thomas's chair by the fire. "This is a comfortable home," Judge Harrison observed, settling himself and studying Catherine with sharp eyes. "Mr. McKenna seems to have done well for himself. 2 daughters, I'm told." "Yes, Emma and Lucy." Catherine remained standing, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "What do you want?" "Justice, Miss Walsh. Or perhaps accountability would be a better word." Judge Harrison reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio. "James Whitmore was a married man when he began his association with you in Kansas. His wife, Margaret, has been searching for evidence of his activities during their separation." Catherine's legs felt weak. She sank into Catherine's rocking chair, the chair where she'd spent countless evenings knitting and telling stories to the girls. "James is dead. What possible difference could any of this make now? A considerable difference to his legal widow, who is contesting his will. You see, Mr. Whitmore left a substantial estate, and there are questions about property that may have been acquired during his relationship with you. Property that legally belongs to his wife." "I don't have anything that belonged to James," Catherine said desperately. "When he died, his wife took everything. The farm, the house, even our son's belongings. I left Kansas with nothing but the clothes on my back." "Yes, about that." Judge Harrison opened his portfolio and withdrew several documents. "There's no record of a marriage between James Whitmore and Catherine Walsh. No record of a legal child. According to Kansas territorial records, you were simply his companion." The word hit Catherine like a physical blow. Companion, mistress, fallen woman, all the ugly terms society used for women who lived outside the boundaries of respectability. "However," Judge Harrison continued, "there is record of a bank account opened in Denver in the name of James Morrison, which we believe to be an alias used by James Whitmore. An account that was never closed and has been accruing interest for over 3 years. Catherine stared at him blankly. "I don't know anything about any bank account." "Perhaps not. But you were seen in Denver approximately 6 months ago, and the account was accessed around that time. A withdrawal was made using forged documents bearing the name Catherine Morrison. The accusation hung in the air like poison." Catherine felt the world tilting around her, understanding finally dawning. "You think I stole money from James's estate?" "I think," Judge Harrison said carefully, "that there are questions that need answering. Questions about your true identity, your legal status, and your recent activities." The sound of the barn door closing reached them through the cabin walls, followed by the voices of Thomas and the girls returning from their horse care lesson. "Catherine's time was up, please," she whispered urgently. "Don't do this in front of the children. They don't know. They think James and I were married, that our son was legitimate. I never meant to deceive anyone here." Judge Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Miss Walsh, I'm not here to destroy your life unnecessarily. But serious allegations have been made, and they must be investigated." The cabin door opened, and Thomas entered with Emma and Lucy flanking him. All 3 flushed with cold and animated from their time with the horses. The scene might have been one of perfect domestic happiness, if not for the stranger sitting in judgment of everything Catherine held dear. "Catherine," Thomas said, taking in the tension in the room immediately. "Is everything all right?" Judge Harrison rose and extended his hand. "Mr. McKenna, I presume." "I am Judge Harrison from Denver. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have legal business to discuss with your wife." Thomas shook the offered hand cautiously, his protective instincts clearly aroused by Catherine's pale face and rigid posture. "What kind of legal business?" "Papa," Emma said, tugging on Thomas's sleeve, "who is this man?" "Why does Catherine look scared?" "Girls," Catherine said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "why don't you go upstairs and play quietly for a while? The grown-ups need to talk." "But Catherine," Lucy began. "Please, sweetheart, just for a little while." Emma, with the intuition of a child who had already lived through one family crisis, shepherded Lucy toward the ladder. But Catherine could see the worry in her young face, the way she kept glancing back, as if afraid Catherine might disappear while she was gone. Once the girls were safely in the loft, Thomas settled into his usual chair, his expression wary but determined. "Now then, Judge Harrison, what's this about?" "I'm afraid there are questions about your wife's past, Mr. McKenna, specifically about her relationship with a man named James Whitmore and certain financial irregularities that may be connected to that relationship." Catherine watched Thomas's face as Judge Harrison laid out the accusations, the lack of legal marriage, the illegitimate child, the suspicious bank account activity. She saw confusion give way to shock, then hurt, then something harder and more distant. "Is this true?" Thomas asked quietly, his eyes finding Catherine's across the room. Catherine's throat felt like it was closing. "Some of it, not all of it. Which parts are true?" The simple question demanded an honesty that would destroy everything, but Catherine couldn't bring herself to lie anymore. "James was married when we lived together. Our son Daniel was not legitimate in the eyes of the law. But Thomas, I never took any money from—" "You lied to me." Thomas's voice was flat, emotionless in a way that frightened Catherine more than anger would have. "You told me you were married to James. You let me believe your son was legitimate. I was trying to protect yourself," Thomas finished. "You were protecting yourself." Judge Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. McKenna, I understand this is difficult, but there are still questions about the bank account. Miss Walsh, you'll need to come to Denver to answer questions about the withdrawals made in the name of Catherine Morrison." "I've never used the name Morrison except—" Catherine stopped, her face draining of color as a memory surfaced. "Oh, dear God, what?" Thomas demanded. "When I was traveling looking for work, sometimes I told people my name was Catherine Morrison instead of Walsh. It sounded more respectable, like I was a widow instead of what I really was. And did you ever present yourself as Catherine Morrison to any banks or financial institutions?" Judge Harrison pressed. Catherine's hands trembled as she tried to remember the desperate months after leaving Kansas. "There was a time in Denver when I was very hungry, very desperate. A woman told me about a man who could help people in difficult situations, who could provide loans, or I don't remember exactly. I was so frightened and alone." Thomas stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back rigid with tension. Catherine could see the war being fought in his shoulders, in the set of his head. "Mr. McKenna," Judge Harrison said gently, "I realize this is a shock, but these are serious allegations. If Miss Walsh is innocent, the truth will come out. If she's not what she claimed to be," Thomas said without turning around. "That much is clear." The words hit Catherine like physical blows. "Thomas, please. Yes, I lied about James and Daniel, but I never stole anything. I was trying to survive, trying to find a respectable way to live. When I came to your door that night, I was telling you the truth about having nowhere to go, about being desperate. Were you?" Thomas turned back to face her, and Catherine saw a stranger in his eyes. "How do I know what's true anymore? How do I know this whole thing, our marriage, your care for the girls? How do I know it's not just another lie to hide what you really are?" Catherine felt like the cabin floor was falling away beneath her feet. "Because you know me, Thomas. You've lived with me for months. You've seen how I care for Emma and Lucy, how I've tried to build a life here. I thought I knew you," Thomas corrected coldly. "But the woman I thought I knew wouldn't have built her entire relationship with my family on deception." From the loft came the sound of Lucy crying and Emma's voice trying to comfort her. The girls could hear everything, Catherine realized with horror. They were witnessing the destruction of their family for the second time in their young lives. Judge Harrison looked increasingly uncomfortable with the domestic drama unfolding before him. "Perhaps we should adjourn this discussion. Miss Walsh, I'll need you to accompany me to Denver within the week to answer questions about these financial irregularities. Mr. McKenna, I'm sorry to have brought this disruption to your home." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're doing your job, Judge Harrison. I appreciate you coming here personally, rather than sending a sheriff with a warrant." Catherine felt panic rising in her chest. "Thomas, surely I don't have to go immediately." The girls need honesty," Thomas interrupted harshly. "Something they apparently haven't been getting." Emma's voice drifted down from the loft, small and frightened. "Papa, is Catherine in trouble? Is she going to have to go away?" The innocent question shattered what remained of Catherine's composure. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Thomas climbed the ladder to comfort his daughters, his voice gentle with them in a way it no longer was with Catherine. "Come down here, girls. We need to talk." As Emma and Lucy climbed down with tear-stained faces, Catherine felt the judge's eyes on her with something approaching sympathy. "Miss Walsh," he said quietly, "if you're innocent of these financial charges, you have nothing to fear from accompanying me to Denver. The truth has a way of coming out, and if I'm guilty," Catherine whispered, "then you'll face the consequences. But either way, it's better to face them honestly than to keep running." Thomas settled both girls on his lap, their small faces turned toward Catherine with confusion and fear. "Girls, Catherine has to go away for a while to help some people understand some things about her past." "But why?" Lucy demanded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We need Catherine." "Who's going to braid my hair and make the good bread?" "Papa will take care of you," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "He always has. He always will." Emma studied Catherine's face with eyes too wise for her 7 years. "Are you coming back?" Catherine looked at Thomas, seeing no softness there, no indication that she would be welcome to return even if she could clear her name. "I don't know, sweetheart," Catherine admitted honestly. "I hope so." Judge Harrison stood and gathered his papers. "Miss Walsh, I'll expect you in Denver by Friday. You can find me at the courthouse." He paused at the door. "Mr. McKenna, I truly am sorry for this disruption to your family." After the judge left, silence filled the cabin like a heavy blanket. The girls clung to Thomas, while Catherine sat frozen in her rocking chair, unable to process the speed with which her world had collapsed. "Catherine," Emma said finally, "did you really lie to us about Daniel and his papa?" Catherine forced herself to meet the child's eyes. "Yes, Emma, I did lie about that. I was ashamed of the truth, and I thought the lie would protect all of us. I was wrong, but you do love us, right? You love me and Lucy and Papa?" The question broke Catherine's heart all over again. "More than anything in the world, sweetheart. More than my own life." Thomas's expression softened slightly at this exchange, but when Catherine looked at him hopefully, his walls went back up. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "I'll take you to town tomorrow to catch the stage to Denver. Thomas, please. There's nothing more to discuss, Catherine. You've lied about fundamental things. How can I trust anything else you've told me?" As Catherine climbed the ladder to gather her few belongings, she could hear Lucy crying again and Emma asking if Catherine was really never coming back. The sounds of her family's pain she had caused through her deception, followed her into the darkness of the loft. The hidden marriage certificate felt like lead in her hands as she tucked it into her small bundle. Evidence of a lie that had seemed so harmless when told to a desperate stranger during a storm, but which had now destroyed the only real happiness she'd known since losing James and Daniel. Tomorrow she would leave the only home she'd found in 2 years of wandering. She would face accusations of theft and fraud. And even if she could prove her innocence, Thomas might never forgive her for the lies she'd built their relationship on. As she lay awake in the bed that would not be hers much longer, Catherine listened to the quiet sounds of the family settling for the night, Thomas's heavy footsteps below, the girls' whispered conversations in the next bed, the familiar creaking of the cabin around them. By this time tomorrow, she would be gone, and the McKennas would once again be a family of 3, bound together by blood and honest love, instead of the deception that had brought Catherine into their lives. The irony was bitter and sharp. In trying to escape the shame of her past, she had only brought greater shame upon the people she'd come to love most in the world. The military medal lay buried beneath old letters and farm documents in the bottom drawer of Thomas's desk, its bronze surface tarnished with age and neglect. He hadn't looked at it in years, had tried to forget the young soldier who'd earned it through acts of courage that now seemed like they'd happened to someone else entirely. But tonight, as he sat alone in the kitchen while his daughters slept restlessly in the loft above, Thomas found himself holding the medal and remembering what it felt like to make decisions that mattered, to fight for something worth preserving. 3 days had passed since Catherine left for Denver with Judge Harrison. 3 days of Emma asking when she was coming home, and Lucy crying herself to sleep every night. 3 days of Thomas wrestling with anger, betrayal, and a loneliness that cut deeper than anything he'd felt since Sarah's death. The cabin felt hollow again, but worse than before Catherine's arrival. Now every corner held memories of her presence. The kitchen where she'd taught Emma to make jam tarts, the rocking chair where she'd told stories by firelight, the garden space where they'd planned together for spring. Her absence was a tangible thing, a weight pressing against his chest with every breath. Thomas turned the medal over in his hands, reading the familiar inscription, "For conspicuous gallantry in action." He'd been 22 when he'd earned it, leading a desperate charge to save his pinned-down unit during an Indian raid. The citation spoke of courage under fire, of decisive action in the face of overwhelming odds. Where was that man now? Where was the soldier who'd never hesitated when lives were at stake? A soft sound from the loft made him look up. Emma was climbing down the ladder in her nightgown, her face pale and determined in the lamplight. "Papa, I can't sleep." Thomas quickly closed his hand around the medal and gestured for Emma to come sit beside him. "Bad dreams again?" "No dreams. Just thinking." Emma settled against his side with the serious expression that had become too common since Catherine's departure. "Papa, I need to tell you something important." "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I think you're making a mistake about Catherine." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. "Emma, there are things about adult relationships that you don't understand." "I understand that Catherine loves us," Emma interrupted with unusual firmness. "I understand that she took care of us when we needed taking care of. And she never asked for anything except to belong somewhere. She lied to us, Emma, about important things." "So did I," Emma said quietly. Thomas looked down at his daughter with surprise. "What do you mean?" "When Catherine first came, I told her mean things that weren't true. I said we didn't need her, but we did need her. I said I didn't like her, but I did like her. I lied because I was scared and angry, and I thought loving Catherine meant I was being mean to Mama's memory." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "That's different, sweetheart. You were protecting your feelings. Catherine lied about who she was, but she didn't lie about loving us, did she?" Emma's dark eyes, so like Sarah's, searched his face. "She didn't lie about wanting to take care of us and be part of our family. Those were the important things, Papa, the things that mattered every day." From his coat pocket, Thomas pulled out the letter that had arrived that morning, a brief note from Catherine, written in her careful script. Emma had seen it arrive, but hadn't asked about its contents, though Thomas could see the hope and worry warring in her young face. "She wrote to us," Thomas said quietly. Emma sat up straighter. "What did she say?" Thomas unfolded the letter, noting how Catherine's usually neat handwriting showed signs of distress, small tremors, and crossed-out words that spoke of emotional turmoil. "Dear Thomas, Emma and Lucy," he read aloud. "I am staying at a boarding house in Denver while the judge investigates the accusations against me. I want you to know that I never took any money that didn't belong to me. The bank account confusion arose from a misunderstanding about names and desperate circumstances I can barely remember clearly. I pray this will all be resolved soon, but I understand if you can never forgive me for the lies I told about my past. Please tell the girls that I love them more than words can say, and that every moment I spent as part of your family was a gift I'll treasure forever. Please take care of each other. With all my love, Catherine." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing the letter's contents. Then she looked up at Thomas with tears in her eyes. "Papa, she's all alone again. Just like when she came to our door in the storm." The simple observation hit Thomas like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his own sense of betrayal that he hadn't fully considered what Catherine was going through, facing accusations of theft in a strange city, with no one to support her or believe in her innocence. "She brought this on herself," Thomas said. But the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Did she? Emma asked with surprising intensity. Or did her past bring it on her? Catherine told us she was alone and scared for 2 years before she came here. Maybe she told those lies because she was trying to survive, like when animals in the forest pretend to be bigger or scarier than they really are. Thomas stared at his 7-year-old daughter, amazed by her insight. Where did you learn to think like that? From you and Mama Sarah. You always told me to try to understand why people do things before I decide if they're good or bad people. Emma leaned against his shoulder again. Catherine did lie, Papa. But she also sang to Lucy when she had nightmares, and she taught me how to make Mama's jam tarts, and she worked in the garden even when her hands got all cut up from thorns. Those things were true too. Thomas thought about the weeks following Catherine's arrival, how she'd transformed their household not through grand gestures, but through countless small acts of service and care. How she'd navigated Emma's resistance with patience and wisdom. How she'd honored Sarah's memory while carving out her own place in their family. And Papa, Emma continued, if Catherine really stole money, why did she stay here with us instead of running away to somewhere far where no one could find her? The question struck Thomas with unexpected force. If Catherine had been a thief, if she'd been using their marriage as a cover for criminal activity, why hadn't she disappeared at the first sign of trouble? Why had she voluntarily gone with Judge Harrison instead of fleeing in the night? I don't know, Thomas admitted. I think it's because she loves us more than she's scared of being in trouble. And I think, Emma paused, gathering courage for her next words. I think you love her too, Papa. Different from how you loved Mama Sarah, but real love. Thomas felt his chest tighten with emotion he'd been trying to suppress. Emma, it's okay, Papa. Loving Catherine doesn't mean you love Mama Sarah any less. You taught me that when I was worried about calling Catherine Mama Catherine. You said love grows to fit whoever needs it. The wisdom of his own words, reflected back through his daughter's clear understanding, left Thomas speechless. He pulled Emma closer, marveling at the strength and compassion in her young heart. What do you think I should do? He asked quietly. I think you should go to Denver and bring Catherine home, Emma said without hesitation. I think you should fight for our family like you fight for everything else that's important. Thomas looked down at the military medal still clutched in his other hand. For conspicuous gallantry in action. He'd earned that medal by refusing to abandon his men when the situation looked hopeless, by making the difficult choice to charge forward instead of retreating to safety. What was this situation but another kind of battle? His family was under assault. Not by enemy soldiers, but by fear, pride, and misunderstanding. Catherine was isolated and facing accusations alone. His daughters were heartbroken and confused, and he was sitting in his kitchen, paralyzed by hurt pride, instead of taking action to protect what mattered most. Papa, Emma's voice was small and uncertain. Are you angry at me for saying those things? Thomas looked down at his remarkable daughter, this child who had somehow developed wisdom far beyond her years through loss, resilience, and love. No, sweetheart. I'm proud of you, proud of your courage and your big heart. He paused, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. And I think you're right about Catherine. I think it's time I stopped being angry and started being brave. Emma's face lit up with hope. You're going to Denver. We're going to Denver, Thomas corrected. All 3 of us. If Catherine is part of this family, then this family stands together, even if she did lie about her past. Thomas considered this carefully. Emma, everyone has things in their past they're not proud of. What matters is who they choose to be today, and how they treat the people they love. Catherine chose to be a mother to you and Lucy, and a partner to me. She chose to stay and face trouble instead of running away. Those choices tell me more about who she really is than any lies about her past. Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Thomas felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of anger and pride that had been choking him for days. We need to pack, he said, standing and lifting Emma with him. If we leave at first light, we can catch the afternoon stage to Denver. What about the animals? The farm? I'll ask Henderson to check on things. This is more important. As Thomas carried Emma back up to the loft, she whispered against his ear, "Papa, do you think Catherine will be happy to see us?" Thomas thought about the woman who had arrived at their door during a storm, desperate and alone, and who had somehow become the heart of their home. He thought about her gentle hands braiding Lucy's hair, her patient voice teaching Emma to knit, her quiet presence that had turned their house back into a family. "I think," he said softly, "Catherine will be so happy to see us that she'll probably cry." Happy tears. The happiest tears of all. Above them Lucy stirred in her sleep, and Thomas heard her mumble, "Mama Catherine," in the confused voice of a child caught between dreams and waking. Tomorrow, if all went well, Lucy would wake up to find that Mama Catherine was coming home, and Thomas would have the chance to tell the woman he loved, yes, loved, he could admit it now, that some mistakes were worth forgiving, and some families were worth fighting for. The military medal felt warm in his palm as he set it on the nightstand beside his bed. Tomorrow, he would need that courage again, but this time he wouldn't be fighting for strangers in uniform. He'd be fighting for the woman who had saved his family and the life they'd built together. Some battles were worth every risk. This was one of them. Sarah's Bible lay open on the small table beside Catherine's narrow boarding-house bed. Its pages yellowed with age and marked with pressed flowers that had long since lost their color but retained their delicate shape. Catherine had carried the Bible with her since leaving the McKenna cabin, finding comfort in the familiar weight of it despite the irony of seeking solace in another woman's book of faith. She had found the pressed flowers tucked between the pages of Psalms, tiny violets and forget-me-nots that Sarah must have picked during some long ago spring and preserved as bookmarks. Each flower felt like a message from beyond, a gentle reminder that love could survive even death, even separation, even the mistakes that seemed unforgivable. The knock on her door came just after noon, soft but insistent. Catherine set aside the Bible and rose from her bed, expecting the boarding housekeeper with news about her afternoon appointment with Judge Harrison. Instead, she opened the door to find Thomas standing in the narrow hallway, his hat in his hands, and his eyes holding an expression she couldn't quite read. Behind him, Emma and Lucy peered around his tall frame, their faces bright with excitement and relief. "Thomas," Catherine whispered, hardly daring to believe they were really there. "What are you... How did you—" "We came to bring you home," Lucy announced, pushing past her father to throw her arms around Catherine's waist. "Papa says you're part of our family and families stick together." Catherine knelt to gather Lucy into her arms, tears already streaming down her face as she breathed in the familiar scent of the little girl's hair. Over Lucy's head she met Thomas's eyes, seeing forgiveness there that she'd never dared hope for. "May we come in?" Thomas asked gently. Catherine nodded, stepping back to allow them into the tiny room that had been her refuge for the past 3 days. The space felt impossibly small, with Thomas's broad shoulders filling it, and Catherine was suddenly aware of how shabby her temporary accommodations were compared to the warm comfort of their cabin. Emma hung back slightly, her usual directness tempered by uncertainty. "Catherine, are you angry that we came? Papa wasn't sure if you'd want to see us." "Oh, sweetheart," Catherine said, reaching out to draw Emma close as well. "I could never be angry about seeing you. You're the most precious things in the world to me." Thomas closed the door softly and remained standing, his hat still clutched in his hands. "Catherine, we need to talk. About what happened, about what comes next." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. Had they come to say goodbye properly? To make sure she understood that her deception had forever changed things between them. "Girls," Thomas said gently, "could you wait in the hallway for a few minutes? I need to speak with Catherine privately." Emma and Lucy exchanged a look that seemed to carry some secret understanding, then moved toward the door with uncharacteristic obedience. "We'll be right outside," Emma said meaningfully, as if to reassure Catherine that they weren't going far. When the door closed behind them, silence filled the small room. Catherine remained seated on the edge of her bed, afraid to stand, afraid to hope. Afraid to breathe too deeply, lest this moment shatter like a dream, Thomas set his hat on the room's single chair and knelt before her, bringing his eyes level with hers. "Catherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I came here to apologize." Catherine blinked in confusion. "To apologize?" "Thomas, I'm the one who lied. I'm the one who—" "You're the one who survived," Thomas interrupted firmly. "You're the one who found a way to keep going after losing everything that mattered to you. And when you finally found a place where you could be safe and loved, you were brave enough to tell me the truth, even though you knew it might cost you everything." Catherine shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I should have told you from the beginning. About James not being my legal husband, about Daniel being... about you being a woman who loved deeply and lost everything, who wandered for 2 years with nothing but hope keeping her alive." Thomas reached up to cup her face gently. "Catherine, I don't care what the law says about your relationship with James. I don't care what some judge in Kansas thinks about your son's legitimacy. What I care about is the woman who sang lullabies to my daughters and taught Emma to honor her mother's memory while building new traditions. What I care about is the woman who made our house a home again. But the accusations, the bank account, will be resolved," Thomas said with quiet certainty. "Judge Harrison told me this morning that they found evidence of the real thief, a man who's been using multiple identities to access abandoned accounts. Your visit to that moneylender in Denver was recorded, but you only asked about legitimate work opportunities. You'd never accessed any account illegally." Catherine felt relief flood through her like a physical force. "Then I'm cleared?" "Completely. Judge Harrison sends his apologies for the ordeal and asks that you stop by his office before you leave Denver, but only to sign papers clearing your name officially." Thomas's thumbs brushed away her tears. "Catherine, you're free. Free of suspicion, free of your past, free to choose what comes next. The weight of 2 years of running, of looking over her shoulder, of wondering when her past would catch up with her, lifted from Catherine's shoulders all at once. She felt dizzy with the relief of it. "What comes next?" she whispered. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his hands still framing her face. "That depends on whether you can forgive me for doubting you, for letting my pride and hurt feelings matter more than what I knew to be true about your character." "Thomas, there's nothing to forgive. There's everything to forgive," he said firmly. "You came to me desperate and alone, and I gave you shelter. You repaid that kindness by devoting yourself to my family, by loving my daughters as if they were your own, by bringing joy back into our lives. And the moment your past caught up with you, I abandoned you to face it alone." Catherine saw pain in his eyes, genuine regret that made her heart ache for him. "You were protecting Emma and Lucy," she said softly. "Any good father would have done the same. A good father would have trusted the woman who'd proven herself every single day for months. A good father would have stood by his wife instead of letting fear and pride drive her away." Thomas paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "A good husband would have told his wife that he loved her before sending her away, so she'd know she was worth fighting for." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. "Thomas? I love you, Catherine Walsh McKenna. Not as a convenient arrangement, not as a solution to a practical problem, but as a woman, as my partner, my companion, the other half of my heart." Thomas's voice grew stronger with each word. "I love your gentleness with my daughters and your strength in facing hardship. I love the way you honor Sarah's memory while making your own place in our family. I love the woman you are today. Not despite your past, but because of how it shaped you into someone who values love and home and belonging above everything else." Catherine felt her world tilt and resettle around this declaration. "You love me?" "Desperately, completely, forever," Thomas smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since Judge Harrison's visit. "And if you'll have me, if you'll have us, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Catherine threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Thomas. Yes to all of it." They held each other in the tiny boarding house room, and Catherine felt like she was finally, truly coming home. Not to a place, but to a person. to a family, to a love that could weather storms and survive mistakes and grow stronger for having been tested. A soft knock on the door interrupted their embrace. "Papa." Emma's voice came through the thin wood. "Can we come in now?" Lucy really wants to hug Catherine again. Thomas and Catherine looked at each other and burst into laughter, the kind of easy, joyful laughter that had been missing from their lives for too long. "Come in." "Girls!" Catherine called out, her voice bright with happiness. Emma and Lucy tumbled through the door, their faces expectant and hopeful. "Are you coming home with us?" Lucy asked directly, climbing onto Catherine's lap as if she'd never been away. "If you'll have me," Catherine said, looking at Emma over Lucy's curls. Emma's smile was radiant. "We brought your things from the cabin. Papa packed them all careful-like. Even your knitting needles and the sweater you were making him." Catherine looked at Thomas with surprise. "You brought my things? I couldn't leave behind anything that belonged to my wife," Thomas said simply. From outside came the sound of other boarding house residents going about their daily business. But inside Catherine's small room, the McKenna family was whole again. Different than before, tested and strengthened, but undeniably, unshakably whole. Catherine pulled Sarah's Bible closer, thinking of the pressed flowers hidden between its pages, fragile things that had somehow survived time and change. Just like the love that had brought this moment into being. The sketch pad lay open on the small table in Judge Harrison's office, Catherine's pencil moving across the paper with sure, confident strokes. She was drawing their family as she saw them now. Not the broken pieces they'd been when she'd first arrived, but the strong, interconnected whole they'd become through choice and love and forgiveness. Thomas sat in the chair beside her, watching her hands bring their story to life in simple lines and gentle shading. Emma and Lucy stood at the window, pointing out landmarks in the bustling Denver streets below, their voices bright with the excitement of an adventure shared together. "The paperwork is complete," Judge Harrison said, settling behind his desk with a satisfied expression. "Miss Walsh, Mrs. McKenna, your name is officially cleared of all charges. I apologize again for the distress this investigation has caused your family." Catherine looked up from her drawing, her hand finding Thomas's automatically. "Thank you, Judge Harrison, for your thoroughness and your kindness throughout this ordeal. The real thief has been apprehended," the judge continued. "He was using the identities of deceased persons to access abandoned accounts, quite cleverly, actually. Your unfortunate coincidence of using a similar name while seeking legitimate work led to the confusion, but the timeline and evidence make it clear you had no involvement in the actual thefts." Thomas squeezed Catherine's hand gently. "What happens to the man who was really responsible?" "He'll face trial and likely prison time. He's been operating this scheme across 3 territories for nearly 5 years. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. McKenna, you're free to return to your life without any shadow of suspicion. Your reputation is fully restored." Emma turned from the window, her face serious. "What about Catherine's reputation in our town? Some people were saying mean things about her before this all got sorted out." Judge Harrison smiled at Emma's directness. "Young lady, the truth has a way of traveling just as fast as rumors. I'll be writing to your local sheriff to explain the resolution of this case. And I suspect word will spread quickly that your stepmother was completely innocent of any wrongdoing." Lucy piped up from her perch at the window. "She's not our stepmother. She's our Mama Catherine." "Ah," Judge Harrison said with understanding. "My apologies. Your Mama Catherine was completely innocent." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at Lucy's automatic correction. Even in the midst of official proceedings and legal language, her daughters had claimed her as fully and completely as any biological parent could hope for. "Papa," Emma said, moving to stand beside Thomas's chair, "can we tell the judge about Catherine's drawing?" Thomas looked at Catherine with raised eyebrows, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's nothing special, just, may I see?" Judge Harrison asked kindly. Catherine hesitated, then turned the sketchpad toward him. The drawing showed the 4 of them standing together in front of their cabin, hands linked, faces turned toward each other, with expressions of love and contentment. But what made the sketch special was the detail Catherine had added in the background, a faint, gentle figure with flowing hair and a kind smile, watching over them all with an expression of peace and blessing. Judge Harrison studied the drawing quietly for a moment. "This is quite beautiful, Mrs. McKenna. You have real talent." "It's our family," Lucy announced proudly. "All of us together, even Mama Sarah watching from heaven to make sure we're happy." "I see that," Judge Harrison said softly. "And are you?" "Happy, I mean." Emma answered for all of them. "We are now. We were sad for a while when Catherine had to come here, but Papa explained that sometimes families have to go through hard things to get stronger, like how muscles get stronger when you use them for heavy work." Thomas chuckled at his daughter's practical wisdom. "Emma has become quite the philosopher." "Children often see truth more clearly than adults," Judge Harrison observed. "Mrs. McKenna, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but watching your family today, the way you all care for each other, the way the children speak of you with such love, it's clear that whatever challenges brought you together, you've built something genuine and lasting." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Judge Harrison. That means more than you know. There is one more matter," the judge continued, reaching into his desk drawer. "During the investigation, we discovered that James Whitmore, your late partner, had indeed opened an account under the name James Morrison. The account was legitimately his, opened before his death, and contained funds from the sale of some property in Kansas that his legal wife had no knowledge of." Catherine felt Thomas tense beside her. "What does that mean?" Judge Harrison withdrew a legal document and set it on his desk. "It means, Mrs. McKenna, that as James's common-law wife and the mother of his child, regardless of the technical legalities, you have a moral and arguably legal claim to these funds. His legal wife has already received his main estate. This account appears to have been his attempt to provide for you and Daniel, though he died before he could make the arrangements clear." Catherine stared at the document, her mind struggling to process this unexpected development. "How much money are we talking about?" "Enough to secure your family's future quite comfortably. Enough to expand your farm, provide for the children's education, perhaps establish some independence." Judge Harrison leaned forward. "The decision is entirely yours, Mrs. McKenna. You could claim these funds as your rightful inheritance, or you could disclaim any interest in them." Thomas looked at Catherine, his expression carefully neutral. "What do you want to do?" Catherine thought about the years of wandering, the desperate hunger, the fear of never belonging anywhere. She thought about the simple cabin that had become her haven, the garden they were planning together, the future they were building with love and hard work rather than wealth. "I want to do what's right," she said quietly. "Judge Harrison, in your opinion, am I truly entitled to these funds?" "In my opinion, yes, absolutely. James Whitmore chose to share his life with you, had a child with you, and clearly intended to provide for you both. The fact that his legal marriage was complicated doesn't negate his moral obligations to you and Daniel." Emma moved closer to Catherine's chair. "Catherine, does this mean we'd be rich?" Catherine smiled at the innocence of the question. "It means we'd be secure, sweetheart. We'd never have to worry about having enough food or a warm place to sleep. But we already don't worry about that," Lucy observed with 4-year-old logic. "Papa takes good care of us." Thomas's expression softened as he looked at his youngest daughter. "That's right, Lucy. We've always had enough, and we always will." Catherine made her decision with surprising certainty. "Judge Harrison, I'll accept half of the funds. I'd like the other half to go to James's legal wife. She lost her husband too, even if their marriage was troubled. It seems only fair that we should both benefit from what he left behind." Judge Harrison raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's quite generous, Mrs. McKenna. You're under no legal obligation to share these funds." "But I have a moral obligation to be fair," Catherine replied. "James loved Daniel and me, but he was also her husband for longer than he was my partner. Besides," she looked around at Thomas and the girls, "I already have everything I truly need." Thomas reached over and took her hand, bringing it to his lips for a gentle kiss. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you, Catherine McKenna?" "Not in the last hour," Catherine replied, with a smile that felt like sunshine. Judge Harrison completed the paperwork with efficient kindness, explaining the details of how the funds would be transferred and what legal protections were now in place for Catherine's claim. As he worked, the girls entertained themselves by examining the various official documents and asking endless questions about how courts and judges worked. "Papa," Emma said thoughtfully, "if Catherine gets this money, does that mean she's truly free now? Like no one can ever say she doesn't belong with us?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "Emma, the money doesn't make Catherine free. Love makes her free. The fact that our family chose each other, that we stand together no matter what challenges come our way, that's what makes us all truly free. But it doesn't hurt to have some security," Catherine added practically. "This money means I can contribute to our household in a different way. Help make sure the farm prospers and you girls have opportunities your papa and I might not be able to provide otherwise." Lucy climbed onto Catherine's lap, snuggling against her with the perfect trust of a well-loved child. "Will you still make the good bread, even if we're rich?" Catherine laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the formal office. "I'll always make the good bread, Lucy. Money can't buy the kind of happiness that comes from baking for people you love." As they prepared to leave Judge Harrison's office, Catherine carefully tore the family portrait from her sketch pad and offered it to the judge. "What's this for?" he asked, accepting the drawing with evident pleasure. "A reminder," Catherine said simply, "that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other, rather than just the ones that are born together." Judge Harrison studied the drawing again, his eyes lingering on the gentle figure of Sarah watching over them all. "I'll treasure this, Mrs. McKenna, and I'll remember that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration." As the McKenna family walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Denver afternoon, Catherine felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since childhood. The legal clouds hanging over her head had lifted completely. Her financial future was secure, and most importantly, she was walking hand in hand with the man she loved, while their daughters chatted excitedly about their adventure. "Papa," Emma said, as they made their way toward the hotel where they'd spend the night before traveling home, "do you think people in our town will treat Catherine differently now that she's been proven innocent?" Thomas stopped walking and knelt down to Emma's level. "Some people might, sweetheart. But the people who matter, the people whose opinions are worth caring about, they'll treat Catherine exactly the same as they did before. Because they judged her by her character, not by gossip. And if anyone is mean to her..." Emma's voice carried a fierce protectiveness that reminded Thomas strongly of himself. "Then they'll answer to her family," Thomas said firmly. "All of us." Catherine felt tears gather in her eyes as she watched this exchange. A year ago, she'd been a woman with no name, no home, no future. Now she was a mother, a wife, a woman with legal standing and financial security, and most importantly, a family who would defend her against the world if necessary. "Come on," she said, gathering both girls close. "Let's go celebrate. I think this calls for the biggest, most extravagant dinner Denver has to offer." "With cake?" Lucy asked hopefully. "With the biggest cake they have," Catherine confirmed, as they walked toward their hotel, the late afternoon sun painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Catherine silently offered a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for the storm that had brought her to Thomas's door, for the courage to tell the truth even when it hurt, and for the kind of love that could survive any test. Behind them, the courthouse stood as a symbol of justice served and truth revealed. Ahead of them lay home, family, and a future built on the strongest foundation of all, love freely given and gratefully received. The new wedding ring caught the morning sunlight as Catherine worked in the garden, its simple gold band warm against her finger as she carefully transplanted seedlings into the rich, dark soil. Thomas had crafted it himself during the long winter evenings, melting down an old piece of jewelry and shaping it with the same patient skill he brought to all his woodworking. It was nothing like the elaborate ring James had given her years ago, but it meant infinitely more, a symbol of choice, commitment, and love that had grown slowly and surely from the most practical of beginnings. Spring had come early to the Colorado mountains this year, and the garden was responding with enthusiastic abundance. The strawberry plants Catherine and the girls had rescued from neglect were putting out new runners and tiny white flowers that promised sweet fruit by summer's end. The herb section was already showing the green shoots of chives, oregano and thyme that had survived the winter, while newly planted vegetables formed neat rows that would soon provide for their table. "Mama Catherine," Lucy called from the cabin's front porch, her voice bright with excitement. "The Hendersons' wagon is coming up the road." Catherine straightened from her planting, brushing soil from her hands and adjusting her sunbonnet. The Hendersons' visits had become more frequent since the family's return from Denver, partly because Mary Henderson had become a genuine friend, but mostly because their youngest son, Billy, had developed what could only be described as a serious case of puppy love for Emma. Thomas emerged from the barn, where he'd been repairing a harness, his sleeves rolled up and his dark hair slightly mussed from work. At 33, he looked younger than he had during those difficult months after Sarah's death, as if happiness had lifted years from his shoulders. "Are we expecting the Hendersons?" he asked, settling his arm around Catherine's waist with the casual intimacy that had developed over their months of marriage. "Mary mentioned they might stop by to see the garden progress," Catherine replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "And I suspect Billy Henderson has been looking for an excuse to see Emma again," Thomas groaned good-naturedly. "She's only 7 years old. Isn't it a bit early for boys to be paying attention?" "And tell that to Billy," Catherine laughed. "Last Sunday after church, he spent 20 minutes explaining to Emma how to properly skip stones. Even though she's been skipping stones since she was 4, Emma appeared in the doorway, her hair neatly braided and her Sunday dress replaced with the practical cotton dress Catherine had sewn for everyday wear. At 7.5, Emma was growing into her role as the older sister with grace and confidence, equally comfortable helping with Lucy's care and working alongside the adults in garden and household tasks. "Is Billy coming?" Emma asked with studied casualness that fooled no one. "Among others," Thomas replied with barely suppressed amusement. "Remember, young lady, you have chores to finish before any socializing." The Henderson wagon pulled into the yard with its usual cheerful chaos, Mr. Henderson calling greetings, Mrs. Henderson carefully climbing down with a covered basket that undoubtedly contained some culinary offering, and their 3 children tumbling out with the boundless energy of youth. Billy Henderson, at 9 years old, had grown nearly 2 inches since winter and now towered over Emma with the awkward pride of a boy discovering he could be useful to girls. His first words were directed entirely to Emma, as if the adults weren't present. "Emma, I brought you something. Papa helped me make it in his workshop." Catherine exchanged an amused glance with Mary Henderson as Billy produced a small wooden box with a carefully fitted lid. Emma accepted it with the dignity of a princess receiving a state gift. "What is it?" Lucy asked, pressing close to examine Billy's offering. "Open it and see," Billy said, his cheeks reddening slightly. Emma lifted the lid to reveal a collection of smooth river stones in various colors and sizes, each one perfectly shaped for skipping across water. "Billy Henderson," Emma said solemnly, "these are the most beautiful skipping stones I've ever seen." Billy's grin could have powered the entire territory. "I collected them all spring. The flat ones skip the best, but the round ones make bigger splashes. Would you like to test them in the pond?" Emma asked, and the 2 children ran off toward the small pond behind the barn, with Lucy trailing behind and calling for them to wait for her. Catherine watched them go with a mixture of amusement and something deeper, a recognition that the children were growing up in an atmosphere of security and joy that allowed for such innocent pleasures. It was a gift she hadn't fully appreciated until she'd nearly lost it. "Catherine," Mary Henderson said warmly, embracing her friend with genuine affection, "you look wonderful." "Marriage to Thomas certainly agrees with you." "Thank you." "Mary, marriage to Thomas agrees with all of us." The two women walked toward the garden, while Thomas and John Henderson examined the repairs Thomas had made to his barn roof over the winter. Their friendship had deepened considerably since Catherine's return from Denver, partly because Mary Henderson had been one of the few neighbors to publicly defend Catherine during the accusations, but mostly because they discovered a genuine compatibility of temperament and interests. "My goodness," Mary breathed, looking at the flourishing garden beds. "Catherine, this is remarkable. You've accomplished more in one season than most people manage in 3. Catherine felt a warm glow of pride. "The soil here is wonderful once you clear away the weeds and give it proper attention. And the girls have been such help. Emma especially has a real talent for growing things. Sarah would be so pleased," Mary said softly, then paused as if worried she'd overstepped. Catherine smiled, the mention of Sarah's name no longer causing the awkward tension it once had. "I hope so. I've tried to honor what she built here while adding my own touches." They toured the expanded garden, Catherine explaining her plans for fall plantings and the herb sections she hoped to establish for medicinal purposes. Mary's enthusiasm was genuine and informed. She was an accomplished gardener herself and offered several useful suggestions about companion planting and natural pest control. "Catherine," Mary said as they paused beside the memorial corner where Sarah's roses were putting out new growth, "I wanted to tell you how much the community has come to respect you, not just because your name was cleared, though that certainly helped, but because of who you've proven yourself to be." Catherine touched one of the rosebuds gently. "I know there was talk when I first arrived, some of it quite harsh. Small communities can be quick to judge," Mary admitted, "but they're also quick to recognize genuine character when they see it. The way you've cared for Thomas and the girls, the way you've contributed to church and community activities, the grace you showed during that terrible time when you were accused, people notice these things. And the fact that I was living in sin with James, that I bore an illegitimate child, people notice that too." Mary was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "Some people do judge you for your past, Catherine. I won't lie about that. But more people judge you for your present, for the woman you are today, the mother you've become, the wife you are to Thomas." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Mary. It means more than you know. Besides," Mary added with a mischievous smile, "anyone who tastes your apple pies at the church socials stops caring about anything else except getting the recipe." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the yard to where Thomas and John Henderson were now, examining Thomas's latest woodworking project, a cradle he'd been crafting with particular attention to detail. Mary noticed Catherine's gaze and followed it to the men. "Catherine, is there something you'd like to share?" Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but couldn't suppress her smile. "It's early yet. We wanted to be certain before telling anyone." Mary squeezed Catherine's hand with delight. "Oh, my dear, how wonderful. When? Late fall, we think. November or December." Catherine placed her hand protectively over her still flat stomach. "We told the girls just last week. Lucy is convinced it will be a baby sister who'll need her to teach everything important. Emma is hoping for a brother so she can teach him to fish and skip stones. And Thomas." Catherine's smile grew even brighter. "Thomas says he doesn't care as long as the baby is healthy and I'm safe. But I've caught him looking at baby clothes in the general store with a very particular expression. The cradle makes sense now," Mary observed. "John mentioned that Thomas was being unusually secretive about his woodworking lately. As if summoned by their conversation, Thomas appeared at Catherine's side, his arm settling around her waist in the protective gesture that had become habit. "Are you tiring yourself?" he asked, with the gentle concern that had marked his behavior since they'd confirmed Catherine's pregnancy. "Thomas McKenna," Catherine said with fond exasperation. "I'm growing a baby, not dying of consumption. I can manage a conversation with Mary Henderson without requiring medical supervision." Mary laughed at the familiar dynamic. "John was exactly the same way when I was carrying our first. You'd think women had never had babies before. Women I love have never had babies before." Thomas replied, with such simple sincerity that both women felt their hearts melt a little. The afternoon passed in the comfortable rhythm of good friends sharing simple pleasures. The children returned from their pond expedition, muddy but triumphant, with Lucy proudly announcing that she'd skipped a stone 3 whole times. Emma and Billy had progressed to building elaborate stone towers, their heads bent together in serious consultation about engineering principles they barely understood, but approached with complete dedication. As the Henderson family prepared to leave, Billy once again focused his attention entirely on Emma. "Emma, next Sunday after church, would you like me to show you the place where I found the best skipping stones?" Emma considered this invitation with the gravity it deserved. "Will Lucy be able to come too?" "I suppose," Billy said with the resigned magnanimity of a boy learning that loving Emma meant accepting Lucy as part of the package. Then yes, Billy Henderson. "I would like that very much." As the wagon disappeared down the mountain road, Catherine stood on her porch with Thomas's arm around her and their daughters playing at their feet, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western peaks. The scene was so perfectly peaceful that she felt almost guilty for being so happy. "Thomas," she said quietly, "do you ever worry that this is too good to last?" Thomas considered the question seriously as he considered all her concerns. "No," he said finally. "What we have isn't built on luck or chance, Catherine. It's built on choice. The choice to love each other, to forgive mistakes, to work together towards something better than what we had alone. Even when I was deceiving you about my past. Especially then. Because even when you were protecting yourself with lies about James and Daniel, you were choosing to love Emma and Lucy with complete honesty. You were choosing to care for our family with everything you had." Thomas turned her to face him. "That's the choice that matters, Catherine. Everything else is just details." Emma looked up from her game with Lucy. "Papa, when the baby comes, will we need a bigger cabin?" Thomas and Catherine exchanged a glance over the girls' heads. They'd actually been discussing that very question, along with several others, about their expanding family's needs. "We might," Thomas said carefully. "Would you girls like a bigger cabin?" "Only if Catherine gets to design the kitchen," Emma said practically. "She knows better than anyone what we need for cooking and storing food," Lucy nodded seriously. "And the baby will need a room close to Mama. Catherine, so she can hear if it cries." Catherine felt her heart swell with love for these remarkable children who had accepted her so completely into their family that they couldn't imagine making major decisions without including her needs and preferences. "We'll figure it all out together," she said, gathering both girls close. That's what families do. As twilight settled over the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the McKenna family moved inside their warm cabin for the evening rituals that had become precious tradition, Catherine reading aloud while Thomas whittled and the girls worked on their knitting, the comfortable silence punctuated by gentle conversation and easy laughter. Later, after the girls were asleep and Catherine and Thomas sat by the dying fire, Catherine reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. 1.5 years ago, she'd been a desperate woman fleeing from shame and poverty with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of grief. Now she was Catherine McKenna, wife to a good man, mother to 2 remarkable girls, respected member of her community, and expecting a child who would be born into security and love. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked softly, noting her contemplative expression. "About second chances," Catherine replied. "About how sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings." Thomas smiled and pulled her closer against his side. "About how a practical arrangement can become the greatest love story of all." Outside, the Colorado wind sang through the pines that sheltered their small cabin, and inside, 2 people who had found each other in desperation now held each other in joy, planning for a future filled with the kind of happiness that grows slowly and surely from the fertile ground of choice, commitment, and grace The new wedding ring on Catherine's finger caught the firelight as she laced her fingers through Thomas's, and she thought about the inscription he'd carefully engraved inside the band, "Chosen with love." It was perhaps the truest summary of their entire story. A family created not by accident of birth, but by the deliberate choice to love, to stay, to build something beautiful together from the broken pieces of their separate lives. In the loft above, Emma and Lucy slept peacefully under quilts Catherine had sewn, dreaming perhaps of baby brothers or sisters, of stone-skipping contests and garden adventures, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected, and part of something permanent and good. And in the quiet of the mountain night, the McKenna family rested in the deep contentment that comes from knowing that home is not a place but a choice. The choice to love each other through storm and sunshine, through mistakes and forgiveness, through all the ordinary miracles that make a life worth living.